American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 641-660. Relying on his invisibility, Rochefort moved unhindered throughout the capital city, conducting more on-the-ground investigations. As night gradually fell, the other side of this mutant society was clearly revealed before Rochefort. When a large number of factories and stores closed down, in countless dimly lit underground civil defense works, a new world, completely different from the daytime, became increasingly active. Accompanied by the constant flashing of neon lights and deafening rock music, a large number of excited young men and women entered the territories of these mutant gangs led by mutants. Based on the various secret matters Rochefort openly heard from these places while infiltrating everywhere. These mutant gangs, which may be spread throughout the entire country, are a group resisting Magneto's suppression. They are also civilian groups formed by opponents who oppose mutants giving everything for ordinary people. Although these guys have not yet developed to the point of implementing terrorist-like cruel methods. The existence of various criminal acts and the resistance thoughts spread to young mutants prove that once the elder Magneto, who firmly controls the entire mutant society, dies or has other problems. The existence of these mutant gangs is a huge hidden danger sufficient to tear apart the consensus of the entire country. In addition, Rochefort also discovered that, although the entire country can be said to be basically free from worries about food and clothing, the level of technology only meets the development standards of a normal country, and there is nothing that far exceeds the times. Moreover, the operation of a society dominated by mutants relies too much on empiricism brought about by superpowers. Many technological manufacturing steps that originally needed to be completely industrialized and proceduralized have been shelved due to the involvement of mutants. Once a generational gap occurs in a crucial link, unless the mutants can recultivate a mutant with similar or the same superpowers to fill the position, the level of technology they currently possess will inevitably lead to large-scale production cuts or gradual demise. Faced with this situation, Rochefort is also very familiar with it. Because this is actually the operating model of the Adeptus Mechanicus in the Imperium of Man. It's just that the mutants are not as insane as the machine oilers. When the time came to midnight, a large number of city streets began to appear with security police wearing black and yellow uniforms. These official personnel, called X-Men, are one of the means Magneto uses to suppress mutant gangs. They often turn a blind eye to ordinary humans and young mutants, merely maintaining order through normal law enforcement means such as fines or arrests. But once mutants in mutant gangs want to resist, the style of these security police will be very radical, even arguably cruel. However, even so, Rochefort, driving the power armor and walking on the city streets, still witnessed more than once heinous crimes committed by mutants. After personally strangling several mutant criminals to death, Rochefort, with a calm expression, quickly controlled the propulsion device at the rear of the power armor. The entire tall body suddenly rose from the ground, avoiding the X-Men who came after hearing the news. Several minutes later, Rochefort, who had returned to the entrance of the Winter Palace, landed heavily from the dark night sky. And he immediately received a warm reception from the mutant officials. Thus, Rochefort, driving the power armor, once again began a second conversation with Magneto, Maxim, who had not yet fallen asleep. Mr. Rochefort's investigation, has it given you a deeper understanding of the current social situation of our mutants? At this moment, Magneto, who was using a magnetic field to control metal wine bottles and glasses, asked Rochefort. I personally believe that those mutant gangs should not have been left behind. Their existence can only bring more harm to your entire social system. Cutting them off at the root is the best option. Rochefort took a deep breath. He casually took a metal wine glass that floated to his front and said to Magneto without any hesitation. Alas, I am, after all, an old man who has been through many battles, and I inevitably feel a little soft-hearted towards those disobedient mutant children. Magneto, with snow-white hair, subconsciously revealed a smile. He raised the metal wine glass and toasted towards Rochefort, continuing to say, "Of course, if I must deal with them, I will not be soft-hearted. After all, the future of the mutant race is far more important than them." As soon as Magneto finished speaking, Rochefort, who also raised the metal wine glass, did not drink. Squinting his eyes, he stared at Magneto's slightly emaciated face and said lightly, Maxim, do you think your mutant race is fully prepared? The price to pay to truly become an ally of the Terra Star Realm Legion is more than you imagine. Even the Asian side is only our strategic partner, and the technology and resource support they get from me is only a drop in the bucket. Hearing Rochefort's words, Magneto took a small sip of wine. He hesitated for a moment, but still said with a solemn expression. Mr. Rochefort, I think we can open the skylight and speak frankly. In my opinion, the Terra Star Realm Legion is not a powerful force born on Earth, is it? When we mutants and humans are still trying to research various scientific research directions, you can come up with very mature technological creations, not to mention those space warships that can be used to fight aliens. There is also the flag symbol of the double-headed eagle, and those giant Astartes in power armor, or the existence of the Emperor. Faith, I'm sorry, Mr. Rochefort, one of our mutant intelligence personnel accidentally became a follower of your Storm Angel. Although the other party's faith is very firm and has not revealed anything to the outside world, the passive insurance device we designed with superpowers successfully transmitted some top-secret information back. It is precisely because of this intelligence information far beyond imagination that I, this old fellow whose life is not long, want to take this opportunity to form an alliance with your Terra Star Realm Legion and gamble on the future of the entire mutant race. At this moment, Magneto, Maxim, finally expressed all the things he had hidden to Rochefort completely. Rochefort, who took a deep breath, became even more profound. One of his vibranium palms moved subconsciously, and the Mind Stone had already entered the depths of his palm. Mutant Maxim, are you sure you want to know the truth of everything and completely join my camp? I think since things have come to this, I have nothing to regret, I am very sure. Very good, then the one standing in front of you now is not the team leader from the Terra Star Realm Legion. I will, in the name of the 22nd Primarch of the Imperium of Man, and in the name of the Emperor of Mankind, accept your native mutant race as subhuman members of the human race. In addition, I can tell you one more thing, that is, the Emperor is not simply a faith, because he is also a truly existing god on Earth. In fact, if Roche wanted to, he could completely control the entire mutant nation with the terrifying power of the Mind Stone. Even without the extra assistance of the Infinity Gauntlet, Roche believed that he could now forcibly activate the Mind Stone and withstand the subsequent side effects. Even if he couldn't support it himself, would the Emperor standing behind him watch him play himself to death? But in the end, Roche, whose thoughts were racing, decided to exchange trust for trust. One reason is that the Mind Stone is not a wishing stone that can solve all problems once and for all. There are many powerful things or existences that can counter it, even on Earth. Once the ability fails and everything is exposed, Roche will have many mutant enemies for no reason. The other reason is because Roche subconsciously believes that conquering a country or the entire Terra in this way is more like a shame to him. Although Roche doesn't seem to care much about battle honor, and his style is more inclined to pragmatism. But as a loyalist Primarch, he must have the responsibility and dignity of a loyalist Primarch. After all, the Emperor is still watching him. So, after the initial realization and shock, Magneto, who was willing to join the human empire, and Roche basically stayed up all night. They began to openly discuss the cooperation model between the two sides. Until the next morning, the two people who had communicated all night immediately summoned the core personnel of both sides, and under the witness of everyone, they signed a joint combat alliance on the surface. The Terra Astra Militarum and the mutant nation will share resources and become firm allies with each other back to back. And Iron Man David, who had been paying attention to the whole process, after obtaining Rock's approval. Its eyes flashed with blue light, and it also gave some technological blueprints involving energy equipment and laser weapons to the mutant side on the spot. Next, according to Rock's subsequent ideas, he plans to hand over the Mobile Hive City project to the mutants to handle. At least the manufacturing and construction of the Mobile Hive City will not need to consume the precious production capacity of the Forge world. And for the volume of a huge country, this level of construction task will be completed very quickly. If the mutant side can execute Rock's orders very well, then more construction tasks for Cobra-class destroyers or Gladius-class frigates will also be handed over to the mutants to produce. At the same time, on the surface, it is an alliance, but in reality, the mutant side, which is more like becoming a subsidiary of the human empire, will also select a group of mutant troops with strong combat capabilities from a large number of mutant groups and hand them over to Rorschach to lead. It's just that Rorschach believes that the combat quality of these mutant troops has not yet reached his conscription requirements, and everyone needs to be retrained by the stormtroopers. And, in order to show the true strength of the human empire. On the other hand, it is also to win over Magneto, this powerful Omega-level mutant. Rorschach also deliberately sent several original versions of the panacea to the other party. When Magneto ate a panacea on the spot without hesitation, and the whole person instantly became more than 20 years younger. Only when the other party, whose head was full of white hair, turned black again, did he truly embark on Rock's big ship and become a qualified crew member. After all, if Magneto wants to witness the entire mutant group become more powerful and prosperous, Rorschach, who is the only one who has the panacea, is the big man that the other party must treat with caution. Of course, if Magneto has evil intentions in the future, or if the mutant group completely exceeds Rock's control in the end, then the mutants who have now voluntarily joined the human empire should not blame the Primarch for being ruthless. Because the human empire has never compromised with heretical elements that betray humanity. Buzzing. Along with the subtle vibrations and buzzing between the air, a series of Azure Square teleportation gates floating in midair gradually teleported Rorschach and others to the Gemini Island base. After the Astartes and two Dominus-class knight armors drove away slowly with heavy steps. Iron Man David, standing next to Rorschach, seemed to have successfully received some new information. It shook its metal head slightly. Its eyes flashed with blue light and said to Rock's tall back, "My lord, while we were conducting exchange activities with the mutants, Dr. Banner, who was deep in the battlefield, accidentally discovered Ms. Natasha, who had survived. It's just that the other party has completely become a female blue giant because she has suffered a lot of gamma radiation. Because Natasha is currently in a special state of losing her mind, not long ago, she was successfully subdued by Dr. Banner after transforming, and was imprisoned on the spot. In addition, rescued with Natasha was also a metal-shaped mutant, Colossus. The other party used to be a mutant officer stationed in the nuclear power plant, but the injuries on the other party's body have undergone changes after being irradiated by gamma radiation, and the mutant side is also helpless about this. It is said that even the panacea does not work. So, the other party has just been teleported to Redidus's Forge world. He plans to use some special properties of experiments to see if he can save this mutant. Of course, I think Redidus just wants to use the other party for scientific research." Hearing Iron Man David's words, Rorschach, driving the power armor and striding with magnetic boots, said without turning his head, "I didn't expect Natasha to be alive. Try to find a way to restore her sanity. Also, you tell Redidus for me, considering this time's huge harvest, I allow it to conduct human experiments, but it needs to pay more attention. If it really can't be cured, then give the other party a quick death. I don't want the mutants who have just joined our camp to come to me for someone, do you understand? My lord, I believe Redidus will know the importance of this matter, and I will also supervise any of its actions." As soon as Rock's voice fell, Iron Man David, bowing slightly, replied without hesitation. Soon after, Rorschach, passing through the base passage, arrived at his private room. He greeted the automatic servo robots that were on standby around him and quickly unloaded the vibranium power armor that he had not taken off for a long time. After the power armor was transported to Redidus's Forge world for maintenance, Rorschach, slowly lying on the metal bed, closed his eyes and rarely began to sleep and rest. However, just after Rorschach completely entered a state of deep sleep, the Chaos God Blessing page, which had never been opened on its own before, quietly appeared in midair. This time, the Nurgle sacred number took the lead and perished together with the Tzeentch sacred number. And when the Slaanesh sacred number wanted to launch a sneak attack on the Khorne sacred number, the Emperor's golden throne suddenly slammed heavily on the Slaanesh sacred number, completely sending the other party back to the initial stage. And the Khorne sacred number, which successfully won this card game, the remaining time also flowed madly towards zero. Gradually awakening, Rorschach slowly opened his eyes. He quickly propped up his muscular and sturdy body from the metal bed. Roche slightly shifted his somewhat bewildered gaze. He discovered from the timing device not far away that he had completely rested for about 24 hours. The next second, feeling that any fatigue and exhaustion in his body had almost disappeared, he got out of bed to wash up while subconsciously opening the simulator page. Chaos Blessing page. And how come all the Blessing Saint numbers have all restarted their countdowns? Crap, could it be? At this moment, with his mouth full of white toothpaste foam, he immediately turned around and rushed out of the private room. The speed was so fast, and the movements were so fierce. It even caused the sturdy body, accompanied by the sound of wind, to directly smash a heavy metal door completely away. And when Roche, with an expression like frost, found the Iron Man David located in the base hall, he immediately ordered the other party to fully power up the large-scale auger array in near-Earth orbit. At the same time, he also asked Iron Man David to search the global network for any clues of chaos intrusion. However, the large-scale auger array operated at high intensity for 12 hours. Even the Asian side and the mutant countries, as well as Rock's major intelligence departments, conducted a large-scale exploration operation. The entire Terra and the planets inside the solar system did not find any signs of chaos existence. Of course, apart from those regional small-scale mortal wars, or the daily actions of those supervillains. The vibrant homeworld can be said to be another peaceful and serene day. Subsequently, Roche, not quite believing it, went to the Emperor's statue in the circular plaza. Under the silent gaze of the Eater of Worlds librarian Yukari, he walked straight to the front of the Emperor's statue and knelt on one knee to begin a long period of prayer. It wasn't until librarian Yukari brought a large bowl of Dow steel nutritious porridge for the third time that Roche, opening his eyes, interrupted the prayer. He still did not receive any instructions or manifestations from the Emperor. Either the Chaos Gods have reached some kind of deal with the Emperor again, or this Chaos Blessing is not in Terra or even the entire solar system. After all, the universe of the homeworld is too big. I just hope that if the blessing has already descended, the other alien races in the depths of the universe can be competitive and have some way to resist the chaos intrusion. Otherwise, if I really nurture a super large chaos demon army, I won't be able to kill them all even if I grow 3 heads and 6 arms. At this moment, Roche, slightly raising his chin, deeply stared at the motionless Emperor statue. Taking a deep breath, he slowly stood up from the metal floor. Frowning, Roche casually stopped librarian Yukari, who was eating, from getting up to salute. He walked thoughtfully towards the passage outside the circular plaza, leaving only the gradually disappearing echo of footsteps and the swallowing sound made by librarian Yukari, who couldn't help but take another sip of the nutritious porridge. Not long after, standing inside the private room, Roche, who had not yet put on his vibranium power armor, inadvertently discovered that his body seemed to have developed much taller than before. If his physique was basically the same size as normal Astartes before, then now he is obviously half a meter taller than the Astartes. Although he has not yet reached the size of Tiberos the Red Wake, the chapter master of the Carcharodons, which far exceeds normal specifications. However, Roche can also confidently believe he is finally no longer the shortest of all Primarchs, at least much taller than Alpharius or Omegan. Soon after, Roche, casually wearing a set of oversized loose casual clothes, found Iron Man David, who was still busy in the base hall. David, if you're not busy, come with me, I have some ideas recently that I want you to experiment with me. As soon as Rock's voice fell, Iron Man David, sitting next to the metal round table, immediately dropped the things it was processing on the network and got up to greet Rock's arrival. My lord, what are your orders? David, do you remember the throne tokens I get from the Emperor every time I complete a prayer support? At this moment, Roche, sitting next to the metal round table, raised a palm. The next second, slightly flipping the palm, 2 palm-sized throne tokens were emitting a golden luster under the light. I calculated that the number of throne tokens I currently have has reached 18. So, I plan to have you join me in an attempt. You can think that we are relying on the throne tokens to have our souls or consciousness sent back by the Emperor's psychic power to a more distant and more dangerous era in the Warhammer universe for many trials. The only benefit is that we will not truly die, and at the same time, we can additionally receive some gifts from the Emperor. But since this is my first time trying to bring someone along, I don't know what will happen. Maybe throne tokens cannot be used by anyone other than me, or maybe your trial process is not in the same space-time as me. In short, I am planning to have you come and try it with me because I trust you the most." With a serious expression, Roche stared at Iron Man David's black reflective metal head. He said to the other party in a very solemn tone, and facing Rock's so serious words and sincere recognition, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in its eyes, quickly got up again and bowed to Roche. Then, it nodded without hesitation and agreed. "My lord, thank you for your continued generous trust. I am very grateful for this. Your every request is the sole purpose of my existence. However, my lord, I have a question. I am a mechanical life. Can I also withstand the psychic power from the Emperor? That's why we have to try it out. I still have so many throne tokens. Even if it fails, it's no big deal. Because next, I also plan to find other people to do the same thing, such as Jessica, who has been a bit lazy recently, is a very suitable candidate. She who grew up in a greenhouse should also see the real cruel battlefield." Taking a deep breath, Roche said in a low voice. And as the voice fell, with a calm expression, Roche reached out and stuffed a throne token to Iron Man David. He continued to say to the other party, "David, later we will throw the throne tokens into the air together. If you can't come along, or are alone in an unfamiliar environment, then just improvise. By the way, remember to pray to the Emperor. I personally think this is an unspeakable luck insurance program." "Understood, my lord. Emperor protects." "Yes, Emperor protects." In an instant, as Roche and Iron Man David almost simultaneously flicked their fingers upwards, 2 golden throne tokens suddenly rolled violently into the air. Ding ding. Simulation starting. Currently possessed identities: Rogel Space Wolves 13th Great Company Captain, Warp in Combat, Rogel Lord Cypher, Craftworld on the Run. Currently possessed companion: Iron Man David, normal. Please select descent identity and companion first. If refused, will descend randomly. Identity selection refused, companion descent selected. Simulation restarting. You are already in the Warhammer universe. Descent time and location will be randomly selected for you. Time: M31. Location: Sol System Terra. You have successfully descended into a gilded coffin covered in seal invocations and thick cables. You slowly open your tightly closed eyes. What the hell is this place again? Is this inside a coffin? Right. Did David successfully descend? Your superhuman senses, far exceeding those of the past, immediately alert you to the strangeness of your surroundings. You forcefully break free from the thick arms that are firmly bound to your chest by bundles of oromite chains. Your palms, seemingly enveloped in some kind of cold, viscous substance, also faintly touch the smooth inner wall of the oromite coffin. You slowly take a deep breath. You gradually feel a powerful physical strength, as natural as moving your own limbs, awakening from within this resilient body of yours, which is filled with an obscure, withered sensation. Rumble. You begin to brew the terrifying power that is gradually flowing within your thick arms, attempting to completely lift the heavy oromite lid that covers you. And with the deafening grinding sound and the ear-piercing roar of the oromite chains continuously snapping, the incredibly heavy oromite lid is forcibly pushed aside onto the ground by you. At this moment, a few faint rays of light finally shine into the dark interior of the coffin, allowing you to see clearly everything inside the coffin for the first time. Right now, you seem to be lying in a special substance that resembles viscous jelly, and similar special substances almost fill the entire coffin. You slowly raise a thick arm and wave it back and forth in front of your eyes. You immediately realize that you seem to be wearing a very heavy oromite restraint armor. You quickly drive your entire body to stand up from inside the coffin. Judging from the current situation, you believe that your entire body size is close to 4 meters or so. Where exactly did the Emperor throw me this time? This isn't my original body. You muttered to yourself while moving the tall body that you had completely taken control of. You carefully stepped out of the oromite coffin, and the viscous jelly-like substance that stained your body quickly dissipated into the surrounding air. You turn your round head, which has a pigtail tied in the center but is barren all around, and carefully observe everything within your field of vision. At this moment, you are standing in the center of an ancient room that resembles a mausoleum. Around the oromite coffin connected to a large number of cables, ancient instruments covered in thick dust are still running continuously, but judging from the occasional sparks that appear, they seem to have already lost any function. While observing your surroundings, you accidentally discovered an extremely thick metal gate. Judging from its appearance alone, it must be a solid defense device cast from oromite. With a slight frown, you look down at your surroundings. You turn around and pick up the broken oromite chains from inside the oromite coffin, and then slowly wrap the oromite chains completely around the fist and oromite armor of your right arm. In the next second, along with a breathing sound that resounded throughout the ancient room, the 4-meter-tall you launched an astonishing short-range charge like a humanoid lightning bolt, and the terrifying iron fist completely wrapped in oromite chains slammed into the middle of the oromite gate. Rumble. Faced with your gradually recovering powerful physical strength, even the incomparably hard oromite gate could not withstand your relentless and fierce attack. After about a few minutes, the oromite gate, which had endured dozens or hundreds of terrifying bombardments, finally collapsed into the unfamiliar outside world as expected. But you, who had just completed an amazing feat, only felt like you had done a warm-up exercise, and there was no feeling of fatigue at all between your bodies. You slightly turned your head and stared at everything in the ancient room, then walked outside without hesitation. You seemed to have entered a spacious, even empty, silent corridor, and the faint light of the ever-burning lamps occasionally illuminates the cold metal floor. And just as your heavy feet accidentally stepped on the twisted and deformed oromite gate, you bent down and lifted the oromite gate that was close at hand, vaguely remembering something. Experiment Subject 11. Tisk. 11. You narrowed your eyes subconsciously and threw away the extremely heavy oromite gate in your palm thoughtfully. However, your mind was running fast, and you didn't think too deeply about it. You turned your head with the pigtail tied up, randomly selected a direction that suited your eye, swayed your tall body wearing restraint armor, and slowly walked towards one end of the silent corridor. However, you, who were walking slowly, did not go far. Dong dong dong, accompanied by the heavy footsteps that gradually resounded in your superhuman senses. A tall custodian wearing gold-trimmed black power armor and holding a relic spear with lightning flashing on its sharp blade rushed towards you head-on. Forbidden thing that tries to escape the shadow cell. Where else do you want to go? Give me peace quickly. The other party's low words continued to pass through the metal helmet to your ears. At this moment, you looked at the shadow cell custodian, whose attack pace was not slow, but full of many flaws, and slowly took a deep breath. You now finally know where you have come to. You are a shadow cell custodian from the shadow cell prison. Then this must be the mysterious prison in the legends, located underground in the Terran Imperial Palace. You quickly moved your huge feet covered in oromite, and your entire tall body rushed towards the shadow cell custodian who was already close at hand like a steel train that had just started. In the next second, the more agile you used the terrifying iron fist wrapped in oromite chains to heavily strike the side of the relic spear that the shadow cell custodian was hacked down on your head, causing the other party's fierce attack to completely fail. At the same time, you, who quickly stepped forward, also took the opportunity to close the distance between each other, and lightly bombarded the chest and abdomen armor of the shadow cell custodian with the other unprotected fist after deliberately reducing the power. Boom. However, as a large number of oromite armor fragments flew everywhere, the shadow cell custodian, whose basic functions of the power armor and the well-trained and powerful physique were not much damaged, only took a few steps back, and the opponent, who reacted quickly changed his combat strategy and re-waved the lightning-flashing relic spear to launch a continuous and crazy attack on you. Is it endless? Then you just lie down for me. With a slight frown, you suddenly stepped on the metal floor, and the speed and power far exceeding this shadow cell custodian instantly burst out from within your body. Boom boom boom, accompanied by a series of buzzing tremors that suddenly tore through the air. Your massive iron fists, encased in adamantine chains, continuously pounded against the towering frame of the shadow cell warden. Under the dual oppression of power and speed, the warden was virtually defenseless, staggering backward. Within mere seconds, the shadow cell warden, its massive body convulsing violently, tried repeatedly to escape your offensive range, but it was constantly thwarted by your nimble footwork, which seemed to be an inseparable extension of your will. Bang! Your gigantic iron fist swung once more, slamming heavily into the shadow cell warden's metallic helmet. With a burst of flying adamantine shards, the warden was completely knocked off its feet and onto the metal floor. To prevent the warden from getting up and retaliating, you deliberately raised your heavy foot and stomped down hard on its chest armor several times. Only when this Shadow Cell Warden, its power armor nearing a state of ruin after enduring numerous heavy blows to the head and torso, temporarily lost consciousness, did you gradually cease your frenzied assault. Hiss. You forcefully exhaled a slightly scorching breath, the iron fist encased in adamantine chains instinctively dropping to your side. You bent over slightly, another hand snatching the Warden's unique relic spear from its grasp. You shook your tall, muscular frame, stepped over the unconscious Shadow Cell Warden, and continued forward into the depths of the silent corridor. Thump thump thump. However, you had only advanced a few kilometers with the relic spear in hand. Accompanied by another series of heavy footsteps that resounded through all your superhuman senses. A 5-man Shadow Cell Warden combat squad quickly traversed the straight, dimly lit silent corridor, rushing towards you head-on. Out of control forbidden artifact. This is not a place for your rampage, return immediately. One of the Shadow Cell Wardens, clad in gold-trimmed, black-bodied Aquila Terminator armor, roared at you in a deep voice. The next second, the rustium-patterned storm bolter, held tightly in his palm, instantly unleashed an incredibly terrifying, dazzling light. Krakatoa bolts, piercing through the air, rapidly swept across your towering frame. Clang clang clang. You abruptly raised the massive iron fist, wrapped and encased in adamantine chains, firmly guarding your undefended head. The exploding bolts, light nearly obscured your vision, causing the adamantine restraint armor all over your body to hum resonantly. But just as you instinctively wanted to shake your towering frame, unleash nimble offensive footwork, and completely close the distance with the Shadow Cell Warden squad. Buzz buzz buzz. Accompanied by a sudden, terrifying buzzing that echoed all around. A massive swarm of nanomachines, densely packed together in midair, its overall shape resembling a dark storm, erupted violently from the silent corridor behind you. At this moment, before you could feel surprised or puzzled by this. In an instant, as if manipulated at will by an unseen entity, the nanomachine swarm swiftly swept past your towering frame, completely engulfing the 5 Shadow Cell Wardens in front. Chirr chirr chirr. As horrifying metal disintegration sounds echoed continuously in the air. By the time the tall figures of the 5 Shadow Cell Wardens reappeared within your field of vision. Almost completely naked, they lay scattered and overturned on the metal floor, their eyes tightly closed, giving them the peaceful appearance of the dead. If it weren't for the rising and falling of their chests, completely exposing that these Wardens were not truly dead, you might have even thought this was another defensive measure within the underground prison. David, you suddenly took a deep breath. You cautiously asked the nanomachine swarm, which was wandering and darting back and forth in the silent corridor, in a soft voice. At this moment, these densely packed nanomachines seemed to have received some kind of command. They rapidly condensed within your field of vision, forming a pitch-black metal giant about 5 meters tall from scratch. My lord, I have actually succeeded in descending as well, praised the Emperor. At this moment, facing this metal giant whose mechanical voice was exceptionally deep and resonant, but whose tone was incredibly familiar, you slowly relaxed your guard. David, what have you turned into? And why are the prisons beneath the Terran Imperial Palace filled with such bizarre things? You slightly shook your round head, adorned with a sky-piercing braid, and asked the Iron Man David, who was even taller than you. My lord, although the original data I can excavate is not much, if I am not mistaken, this is likely a combat-type Iron Man from the Iron Man Rebellion era. Moreover, it seems that the other party is that kind of Iron Man general located in the command echelon. The Iron Man David, whose eye sockets gradually lit up with azure light, said to you in a deep voice. At this moment, you couldn't help but stare at the Shadow Cell Warden squad, which had been almost instantly annihilated not far away, and then looked at the Iron Man David, who was close at hand. You subconsciously let out a sigh. Just how strong were humans in the Golden Age that they could win against combat-type Iron Men of this caliber? The Iron Man David, who was listening attentively, quite agreed with your sigh. However, it also indicated to you that perhaps this Iron Man general had suffered excessively severe combat damage in the past, or had been fitted with some kind of restriction. Even after devouring the power armor of several Shadow Cell Wardens as an energy supplement, it would still need a cooldown period to launch a similar nanomachine swarm offensive mode again. You nodded slightly to the Iron Man David, indicating your understanding. You grip the relic spear in your palm and, together with the Iron Man David, who had descended as an Iron Man general, walk deeper into the silent corridor. Soon after, you gradually passed many forbidden artifacts that had been completely imprisoned, such as chaos greater demons and other evil things. But at the same time, you also saw many prison doors that had already been damaged, with empty cells where the forbidden artifacts inside had escaped long ago. As time went on, you and the Iron Man David quickly passed through the silent corridor and the maze-like underground shadow cell, eventually arriving at a mysterious underground cave surrounded by natural karst landforms. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The building complex beneath the entire Terran Imperial Palace extends far beyond just the Shadow Cell, a subterranean prison holding countless forbidden artifacts. Millennia of excavation and construction have practically hollowed out the entire Himalayan mountain range, transforming it into the Emperor's secret treasury. Therefore, it's understandable that you and Iron Man David inadvertently got lost. As you and Iron Man David continue your exploration deeper and deeper, the originally narrow underground cave passages gradually widen. After you unexpectedly discover a freshwater stream with signs of artificial construction, you immediately decide to follow the stream's flow, hoping to find a real way out. Soon after, amidst the chilling, bone-piercing dampness in the surrounding air and the reflection of numerous snow-white stalactites, a vast palace complex, situated beside an underground lake and covering a considerable area, clearly comes into view for you and Iron Man David. You take a deep breath of the cold, damp air. You slightly turn your round head, adorned with a sky-piercing braid, silently surveying the mysterious palace in the distance. Just then, you happen to notice that the architectural dimensions of these exceptionally ancient and exquisite palaces far exceed the normal size of Astartes. It seems only gene sires far taller than Astartes could match them and become their masters. Immediately following, Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in the eye sockets of his black metal head, reports the total number of palace buildings to you. According to him, there are a total of 21 palaces in the complex before you. 20 of them are in complete condition, with only the last palace seemingly having just had its new foundation laid, and even its basic overall structure hasn't been built yet. You subconsciously let out a sigh. If you're not mistaken, this is probably the residential palace that the Emperor prepared for all the gene sires in the past. You slightly shake your head and say to Iron Man David beside you in a low voice. However, before Iron Man David could respond to your words, rumble, rumble, rumble. Just then, from the depths of the entire vast palace complex, sudden bursts of terrifying psychic energy rise into the air, and the icy frost rapidly spreading across the surrounding ground, along with various abnormal phenomena, instantly cause you to frown. You instinctively tighten your grip on the relic spear in your palm, and the giant iron fist, entwined with adamantine chains, can't help but hum. In the next moment, you and Iron Man David, in perfect coordination, simultaneously launch into a swift charge towards the depths of the palace complex. Not long after, when you quickly arrive at an exquisite courtyard located on the edge of the underground lake, you, having just stopped in your tracks, are shocked to see a frail old man in black robes is being psychically choked by a red-haired giant, several meters tall and clad in magnificent armor, who is rapidly pulling him into his massive hand. At the same time, 4,000 sons Astartes, wielding bolters and wearing gold-trimmed blue power armor, are engaged in a tense standoff with a woman with a solemn expression. Could that be Magnus? At this moment, you can't help but widen your eyes and instinctively let out an angry roar that echoes around. With eyes wide with rage, you almost instantly recognize the true identity of the red-haired giant. It is none other than Magnus the Red, one of the most heinous traitor primarchs during the Horus Heresy. The mastermind whose psychic communication completely bankrupted the Emperor's Webway project, the gene sire of the Thousand Sons Legion, the Crimson King, the one-eyed Magnus. Thump, thump, thump. In an instant, the relic spear held tightly in your palm instantly activates a crackling disruption field. Your two heavy feet take turns stomping forward, forcibly shattering the surrounding hard ground. The terrifying power contained within your entire towering body almost instantly flows outward from the resilient dragon bones behind your spine, rapidly pouring into your thick arms. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the next second, accompanied by a terrifying roar that suddenly cuts through the cold air, and layers of visible shockwaves. The relic spear, thrown with all your might, slams heavily into Magnus's massive body like a missile breaking the sound barrier. In a flash, Magnus, who casually throws the black-robed old man to the ground, slightly turns the two eyes on his bronze face. He abruptly raises a massive palm, and readily available chaos psychic sorceries rapidly materialize in the cold air, colliding fiercely with the relic spear that is about to reach him. After the relic spear, with its terrifying speed and power, is completely destroyed by the ubiquitous psychic sorceries. Magnus, whose eyes immediately capture your towering figure, subconsciously lets out a cry that echoes around. This is impossible. Brother, you're still alive. Wait, you're not him. So it's just my little brother whom I can't wait to cut into 1,000 pieces, it's you again, you damned jinx. In the next second, however, the Crimson King, seemingly realizing something completely, first breathes a sigh of relief, and then, in a gnashing, maniacal tone, roars loudly in your direction. Dog of the false emperor, return my soul shards. At this moment, an even more terrifying psychic surge erupts outward from within Magnus's massive body. Whether it is the Thousand Sons Astartes standing near him, or the black-robed old man with a calm expression and a smile on his lips, and the unfamiliar woman, all are sent flying outward by the nearly berserk psychic shockwave. And even though you are separated from him by a considerable distance, the burning and stinging sensation from the terrifying psychic energy also causes your entire towering body to undergo indescribable and drastic changes. In an instant, rhomboid, colorful bone scales rapidly condense on your exposed skin, then completely cover every inch of your body. Even the heavy adamantine containment armor cannot resist the cutting and piercing from the colorful bone scales. Next, from within the giant iron fist, which is tightly wrapped with adamantine chains, 3 bone spikes, each about a meter long, suddenly extend outward. And your other empty giant hand, including the entire arm, rapidly melts and extends, completely transforming into a bizarre tentacle like an octopus. At this moment, you no longer have time to think about why this unfamiliar, powerful body is undergoing such a mutation. You simply silently feel the terrifying power that seems to be constantly surging from within your body, and with a pair of gradually bloodshot eyes, resembling the vertical pupils of a reptile, you stare intently at the Crimson King's terrifying figure, saying one word at a time. Magnus, prepare to die. Boom, boom, boom. You took a deep breath of the damp, cold air. You quickly moved your 2 massive feet, encased in auramite, and launched a terrifying charge towards Magnus with astonishing momentum. With each step you took forward, a large, cracked pit would immediately collapse into the hard, flat ground, but the powerful propulsion that followed would drive your incomparably tall, mutated body closer and closer to your opponent. Chi, chi, chi. Accompanied by the terrifying psychic energy fluctuations omnipresent in the surrounding cold air. Psychic sorceries summoned at will by Magnus constantly slashed through the air, bombarding your body. You had to rely on the nimble steps you took without pause, and your almost instinctive superhuman senses, to perform extreme dodges. As for those psychic sorceries that were too difficult to dodge due to their tricky angles, you forcibly endured them with your Primarch-level mutated body. You also keenly noticed that as more psychic attacks repeatedly impacted the surface of your auramite containment armor and eroded the iridescent bone scales, the quality and defensive capabilities of these bone scales were rapidly being upgraded. They even eventually transformed into a cyan color that could withstand even more psychic energy. Rumble. When a large number of psychic sorceries seemed to have no effect on you anymore. Magnus, his eyes wide open, suddenly let out an angry roar, and he also propelled his massive body forward in a charge with astonishing momentum. As wisps of flame-like psychic energy constantly enveloped his bronze skin and long red hair. An exquisite scepter that suddenly appeared in his massive palm rapidly condensed into a terrifying spear radiating a scarlet light. Chi, chi, chi. In a flash of lightning, you forcefully swung out your mutated arm, which resembled an octopus tentacle. After the tentacle's tip, covered in bizarre suction cups, rapidly extended forward for more than 10 meters, it unhesitatingly swept fiercely towards Magnus's massive body. However, the grimacing Magnus had no intention of dodging at all. He allowed your mutated tentacle to shatter the sturdy, ornate armor on his massive body, and the scarlet spear he held tightly in his massive hand suddenly slashed through the air, carrying wisps of psychic energy, and crashed down towards your head. Squeak. With your superb reaction speed, you tried your best to dodge, personally sending your broad shoulder to the path of the scarlet spear's attack. In an instant, the nearly indestructible scarlet spearhead pierced through your auramite containment armor and the psychic energy-resistant cyan bone scales without any hindrance, like a hot knife through butter, completely piercing through your shoulder. But at the same time, before Magnus, who was close at hand, could reveal much of a grimace on his face. Your mutated arm, which resembled an octopus tentacle, had already firmly wrapped around his thick waist, forcibly pulling Magnus, who was several meters away, towards you. Immediately afterwards, the narrow bone spike iron fist wrapped in a large number of auramite chains pierced through Magnus's ornate armor, directly piercing through the other's massive body from the ribs. At this moment, you stared intently at the almost face-to-face Magnus with a pair of blood-red vertical pupils, and Magnus, who couldn't help but gasp, also stared firmly at your ugly face covered in cyan bone scales. Rumble. Just as blood and minced meat continued to flow and fly between each other. An extremely thick magic tome fell from Magnus's waist into his other palm, and then, wrapped in wisps of psychic energy, slammed fiercely towards your head. Most of your face covered in cyan bone scales, along with one of your eyes, exploded in response, but you didn't seem to feel any pain at all. You couldn't help but grin hideously as you forcefully pulled the narrow bone spike iron fist out of the other's body, and the mutated arm that was firmly wrapped around the other's waist also used all its strength to lift the massive Magnus from the ground into the air, and then slammed him heavily to the ground. Rumble. The terrifying impact visible to the naked eye and the terrifying cracks constantly spreading around proved that the conflict between the two sides could not be reconciled. In the next second, Magnus, whose spine landed heavily on the ground, couldn't help but spurt out a large mouthful of scarlet blood mist. However, the scarlet spear that had been tightly held in his palm suddenly slashed through the air, actually completely severing a portion of your extended and elongated mutated arm. At this moment, your entire tall body, with its severed arm, subconsciously took a few steps back. The rapidly retracting mutated severed arm actually began to writhe and change visibly again, and after only a few breaths, a hard appendage resembling a large scythe was completely condensed by you. You quickly took a deep breath of the air filled with the smell of blood. The massive scythe appendage, suddenly raised towards the front, unhesitatingly chopped down towards Magnus, who had just stood up. Clang, clang, clang. Magnus, his ornate armor shattered and blood flowing from his chest, repeatedly waved the scarlet spear in his palm, choosing to engage in a fierce collision with you in terms of combat skills. However, at this moment, on another battlefield not far from the two of you, Iron Man David, who was being besieged back and forth by 4,000 suns using a mandala formation and psychic sorceries, finally found a fatal flaw. Its eye sockets flashing blue light, it quickly manipulated the terrifying metal body belonging to the Iron Man general, forcibly tearing 1,000 sun who didn't have time to dodge into pieces of flesh and blood flying everywhere. Xenos, how dare you! In the next second, Magnus, whose psychic perception range was extremely large, subconsciously let out a roar full of shock and anger. A large number of psychic sorceries summoned at will by him suddenly slashed through the air, forcibly bombarding Iron Man David's terrifying metal body, temporarily buying a chance of survival for the remaining 1,000 suns. But at the same time, Magnus, who was slightly distracted, was also quickly seized by you for a fleeting flaw. You suddenly swayed your tall body covered in cyan bone scales, and the terrifying arm that had completely transformed into a scythe appendage had quickly passed through the gap inadvertently left by the scarlet spear, and chopped heavily towards one of Magnus's thick arms. At this moment, accompanied by Magnus's sudden painful howl as his expression twisted and deformed. Half of his severed arm, surrounded by wisps of psychic energy, along with the scarlet spear in his palm, completely separated from his massive body. However, at this moment, just as you were about to seize this opportunity and try to completely leave Magnus himself, who had not yet ascended to demonhood, here. Magnus, who was enduring the pain of his severed arm, suddenly grabbed the extremely thick magic tome from his waist and quickly retreated. He slightly raised his head, full of red hair, and stared intently at you, who had launched a short charge, with eyes full of hatred and disgust, and then unhesitatingly used his powerful psychic abilities to cast a teleportation spell. In the next second, whether it was Magnus, who had just lost an arm, or the 3,000 sons whose armor was shattered and riddled with wounds, all of them disappeared from your sight in a chaotic warp surge. Huff! Instinctively stopping your heavy steps, you shook your head, adorned with a sky-piercing braid, and let out a gasp filled with unwillingness. As everything gradually subsided, even the eye and half of the face that had been smashed by Magnus not long ago quickly recovered. Hey, you blockhead! Don't just stand there like an idiot. Get over here. At this moment, among the courtyard ruins not far from you, the black-robed old man, leaning on an ancient scepter in his palm and slumped on the ground, suddenly shouted in a deep voice towards your direction. You slightly turned your pale face, where the azure bone scales were gradually receding. You quickly activated your towering body, where the scythe-like limbs and narrow bone spurs were gradually retracting and disappearing, and walked towards the black-robed old man. Soon after, swaying your body as you arrived in front of him, you knelt on one knee towards the black-robed old man without any hesitation, slowly lowering your head, adorned with a sky-piercing braid. Regent, you called out to him, your voice slightly deep. You didn't even need to think much to be sure that the black-robed old man in front of you, who looked so frail, was none other than the Emperor's only confidant and capable assistant, the first regent of the Imperium of Man, Malkador the Sigillite. At the same time, the Iron Man David, moving his massive metal body closer, hesitated slightly and also knelt on one knee towards the black-robed old man. Good child, thank you for your hard work. Just call me Gramps, after all, I'm old enough to be your grandfather, right? Malkador, his wrinkled face showing signs of age, gazed at your appearance with a look full of reminiscence, and then he said to you with a chuckle. Gramps, whatever makes you happy. You slowly raised your head, your gaze fixed on Malkador, and said with a helpless expression. Is this little fellow your companion? A loyalist Iron Man? Alas, if I had encountered something similar in the past, I wouldn't have had to work so hard. Malkador, a hint of a smile unconsciously appearing at the corner of his mouth, refocused his gaze on the Iron Man David, and then asked you. After receiving your affirmative answer, Malkador jokingly said to the Iron Man David. Hee, kid, an Iron Man regent, you really came up with something. Forget it, the future is none of my business. You over there, remember to assist your master well, got it? At this moment, hearing Malkador's instructions, the Iron Man David was slightly stunned at first, and then the blue light in his eye sockets flickered rapidly as he lowered his metal head towards him. After all, being personally recognized by this great old man was a rare honor in the entire Imperium of Man. In the next moment, Malkador, slumped on the ground, tightly gripped the ancient scepter in his palm with one of his gnarled, aged hands, wanting to support his frail body beneath the black robes to stand up. You hurriedly reached out your thick arm, which had fully recovered, wanting to carefully help him up, but were interrupted by Malkador, who couldn't help but furrow his brow. Get out of the way, I can do it myself. Malkador said stubbornly. So, with your thick arm frozen in midair, you could only helplessly watch Malkador, trembling, struggle to support his aged body. At the same time, your slightly shifting gaze inadvertently noticed the mortal woman lying motionless on the ground in the distance. You subconsciously turned your head and glanced at the Iron Man David, who immediately understood and got up to walk towards her. All of you who can come back are good children. Malkador, who had just stood up, seemed to notice your small movements. He slowly took a deep breath and shook his head with a sigh. Gramps, if I'm not mistaken, is the Primarch level shell that I've descended into now. At this moment, with a slight stirring in your heart, you couldn't help but ask Malkador in front of you. Silly boy, since you've already guessed it, why bother asking me? Malkador, unconsciously revealing a wry smile, reached out and patted or rather, Eleven's, broad shoulders, and said with a sigh. I can't tell you all the truth, but for your next battle, part of the information I can reveal to you is that the owner of this shell, in order to pursue elusive power and stabilize the gene seed of the Legion, accidentally found the genetic engineering technology relics left behind by an ancient alien race called the Old Ones. No one knows what exactly happened, but when he reappeared, he had completely transformed himself from the inside out into a terrifying monster that wasn't even human anymore. If you encounter a difficult situation later on, Then you might as well devour the corpses and flesh on the battlefield, and try to unleash the hidden madness of this shell, which may have some unexpected effects, but the consequences that follow will also need to be borne by you alone. Child, that's all I can tell you about him. However, from the moment you appeared just now, I instantly understood that all the plans I designed for the future were basically moving slowly along the predetermined path, especially that conjecture. Perhaps all of us have paid an extremely painful and exorbitant price, but the Imperium of Man has still continued. It's just a pity that I'm afraid I won't be able to see that day. Child, I know what you want to say to me, but many things are things we have to do, just like how she, heartbroken and angry at the time, took action to destroy the true owner of this shell, and most importantly, we actually don't have much time left. Shaking his head and smiling, Malkador raised his hand to stop the series of words you wanted to persuade him with, and he took a deep breath and continued. If this is a game of king against king, general against general, Kinslayer chess, then now we and those guys have already reached a final game that determines everything. This is my final game, and it's also her final game. But it's definitely not your final game. Dong, dong, dong. You continuously take heavy steps, rushing forward into the dim passage alongside Iron Man David behind you. The close quarters weapon, which has transformed from the crimson spear back into a golden scepter, is casually placed horizontally behind your waist, swaying slightly with your footsteps. At this moment, a short period of time has passed since you met with Micardo. Currently, you are leading the massive Iron Man David, heading quickly towards the walls of the Terra Imperial Palace under Micardo's kind guidance. Although the arrival of a single lost Primarch has limited impact on this intense and even white-hot siege battle, your combat power is enough to reduce the number of casualties among the loyalist mortal soldiers and Astartes, relieving Rogel Dorn, the supreme commander of the Terra defense, of considerable pressure. Boom, boom, boom. Just then, Iron Man David, its eye sockets flashing blue, suddenly accelerates past you. One of its black metal arms, along with half of its metal body, heavily collides with a metal door a foot thick. In the next second, accompanied by countless metal fragments flying everywhere and deafening roars echoing around, the entire metal door is sent flying outwards by Iron Man David's impact. At the same time, strands of natural light, far brighter than the lamps, shine diagonally at your feet. Immediately following, a large amount of battle sounds from the top of the Terra Imperial Palace walls continuously reach your ears. You seem to hear the faint sounds of countless solar auxilia and mortal soldiers pulling the triggers of their lasguns, as well as the huge roar of fighter jets suddenly streaking across the sky within the atmosphere. You vaguely hear the terrifying sounds of chainswords being wielded by the Astartes of the Imperial fists and bolters firing, as well as the howls of chaos demons summoned by the Word-Bearer's Legion, and the sneers and curses of numerous traitor Astartes landing on the walls. You instinctively take a deep breath. You quickly start moving your heavy steps, rushing out of the dim, hidden passage. Your foot inadvertently steps on many flyers printed with the towering image of the Ultramarines and Gilliman's imminent arrival. You subconsciously turn your gaze. You immediately see the Aegis, like an inverted giant bull, completely covering the Imperial Palace, enduring intense bombardment from a large amount of terrifying artillery fire. At the same time, you also notice that the surrounding air and ground are covered with a large amount of white, snowflake-like ash. This is stark evidence that, apart from the Terra Imperial Palace protected by the Aegis, the rest of Terra and countless lives have been reduced to ashes by the traitors and chaos demons. Dong, dong, dong. Just then, within your field of vision, you quickly catch sight of an Iron Warriors Terminator squad that has successfully teleported to the top of the wall, and a large number of mortal soldiers who have temporarily fallen into chaos due to the arrival of the traitor Astartes. Without any hesitation, you raise a giant hand and point forward. Iron Man David, standing behind you, quickly transforms into a terrifying swarm of nanomachines, pouncing on the Iron Warriors Terminators who are wantonly slaughtering the mortal soldiers. Even for the mortal soldiers, the Iron Warriors Terminators are like demons descending, but for the Iron Men generals from the Iron Men Rebellion, they are just a group of mobile energy sources. In the blink of an eye, this Iron Warriors Terminator squad, heavily enveloped by the nanomachine swarm, is quickly and completely torn apart by Iron Man David, including their thick ceramide armor, into a sky full of flying flesh and blood. while those mortal soldiers are uncertain and apprehensive about the appearance of the nanomachine swarm. You slowly appear before everyone, swaying your tall body. Although many of the mortal soldiers do not recognize who you are. As long as they are not being attacked and are a terrifying giant far exceeding the size of an Astartes, they are all referred to as Primarchs. You immediately stop the mortal soldiers from kneeling on one knee before you. You first encourage their loyal spirit and unwavering fighting will in bravely defending the Imperial Palace walls, and then inquire about Rogaldorn's whereabouts. The mortal soldiers who heard your inquiry looked at each other, and finally a mortal officer, who seemed to be a commander, pointed you in a direction with some uncertainty. You nodded to thank the other party, and then you quickly directed Iron Man David, who had not left the nanomachine swarm state, to rush forward. Along the way, you have repeatedly saved a large number of remnants surrounded by traitors and chaos demons, and even successfully defended many defensive turrets and important redoubts. Now, your two arms have completely transformed into two huge flesh cleavers, and colorful, stubborn scales have reappeared on your body surface. Looking only at the appearance, you, who are not much better than those chaos demons, and the nanomachine swarm, which has absorbed a large amount of energy material and has significantly increased in size, are constantly advancing along the wall, providing support while searching for Rogaldorn's conspicuous figure. Boom, boom, boom. Just then, your superhuman senses keenly perceive that near a broken section of the wall ahead, a World Eater wielding two roaring chainixes with bare arms is engaged in a fierce back-and-forth battle with an Imperial fist wearing tattered power armor. Without any hesitation, you take heavy steps, your whole body like a rumbling flesh train, directly leaping high from the ground, and then crashing into the center of the battlefield between the two. In the next moment, the Imperial fist holding the black sword is immediately shocked, and the magnetic boots he quickly moves cause his tall body to suddenly retreat backward. But the World Eater wielding the chain axe fearlessly launches a fierce attack on you. However, you simply use your two terrifying arms, transformed into flesh cleavers, to chop and slap at random. The World Eater with bare arms is instantly split in two from the middle, and then his broken corpse is slapped away by you, falling towards the high wall below. You disgusting monster! Who are you? Why do you help me? Quickly state your name. At this moment, the Imperial fist Astartes, who has become even more vigilant, tightly grips the huge black sword with a glazed luster in his palm, and asks your broad back in a deep voice. If I'm not mistaken, that should be a black sword, right? Sigismund, you truly are a son of Dorn, your words are never pleasant. You slowly turn your head with the sky-piercing braid, and a hideous smile faintly appears on the ugly face covered with colorful bony scales. I am Rogaldorn's brother, and a lost loyalist Primarch. Sigismund, champion of the Emperor, adjutant to Rogaldorn, and former first captain of the Imperial Fists. Referred to as the greatest warrior after the Primarch by all who witnessed his battles, and also the first High Marshal of the future Black Templars chapter. Moreover, he uttered a profound statement, almost prophetic in nature: in the far future, there is only war. However, at this moment, Sigismund, who is still honing his swordsmanship, has just received the black sword from the Emperor and become the Emperor's champion. At this moment, Sigismund, still doubtful of your revealed Primarch identity, has not immediately acknowledged it. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the massive black sword, scrutinizing you through his helmet's lenses for a good while before expressing his gratitude in a low voice. Subsequently, you inquired about the whereabouts of Rogaldorn. However, Sigismund, still maintaining a high level of vigilance in his heart, did not reveal any information about his gene father. He paused for a moment, contemplating, and decided to personally lead you to find Rogaldorn. You slightly shook your head, adorned with a sky-piercing braid, expressing your agreement and understanding. You understand Sigismund's concerns. He fears that you are a monster or death cultist sent by the traitors to assassinate Rogaldorn. But at the same time, he is also worried that if you are indeed a lost Primarch, his rejection might damage your resolve to defend Terra and the Emperor. And the reason he chose to personally lead you to find Rogaldorn is because with Rogaldorn's combat abilities as a Primarch, as long as he has initial precautions, even if you are indeed a tool sent by the traitors, it doesn't matter. The Gene Father and Gene Son fighting together might be enough to cut you down on the spot. You quickly scanned the surrounding battlefield. You raised your hand, beckoning the Iron Man David, transformed into a nanite swarm, to go and support the city walls, eliminating any approaching Astartes traitors or chaos demons. Then, you, with a towering physique far exceeding that of an Astartes, followed behind Sigismund, heading towards the troop transport tunnels deep within the ruined city walls. Soon after passing through numerous complex and sturdy tunnels, you quickly arrived on the ground below the city walls, temporarily away from the war-torn heights above. Oh, how convenient, there's even an unexpected reward. Just then, a giggling sound slowly drifting in the ash-filled air suddenly reached your and Sigismund's ears as clearly as a leech clinging to a bone. Reacting swiftly, you and Sigismund almost simultaneously shifted your heavy footsteps, adjusting your directions while also relying on your respective rich combat experience to temporarily form a back-to-back defensive battle formation. Accompanied by a faint, unhurried footstep. On the Emperor's Palace Road not far away, where the buildings had collapsed and were covered with ash-like snowflakes. A tall figure holding a slender blade shimmering with cold light, wearing a suit of purple and gold power armor, slowly revealed an almost demonically exquisite face. At this moment, you, with your eyes slightly widened, stared intently at that somewhat familiar tall figure, subconsciously taking a deep breath through your nostrils. The fallen phoenix of the Imperium, Fulgrim. You enunciated each word clearly, shouting towards the tall figure not far away, who was striding forward. And this name, belonging to a traitor Primarch, once again plunged Sigismund beside you into a state of shock far exceeding the previous one. But at the same time, Fulgrim's words indirectly proved your identity as a lost Primarch, gaining Sigismund's trust. Oh, this doesn't seem to be your true body, does it? 22. Aren't you afraid of being slapped to death by the false emperor for arbitrarily seizing the flesh and blood husk of your brother? Why don't you choose to abandon the darkness and come to my embrace? Besides the love of me, your brother, I believe my master will surely regard you as the apple of his eye. Since defeat is inevitable, why fight to the death for a heartless tyrant? Fulgrim, who had already become a demon prince of Slaanesh, slightly blinked his pair of purple pupils, which were far more strange than before. His incomparably exquisite and beautiful face seemed to emit a faint purple halo amidst the countless snowflakes of ash. Hey, my pathetic brother, I'd rather join Khorne than become a transvestite freak like you. Besides, unlike you, I don't have the special fetish of becoming someone else's lapdog. You stared at the seductive Fulgrim and sneered, unable to resist uttering words full of sarcasm. Ah, you scold me so excitingly. Before Fulgrim, with a swaying expression on his face, could continue to speak. You slightly twisted your neck, covered with colorful bone scales. As you stepped forward, you said in a low voice to Sigismund, who was eager to try, without turning your head. Sigismund, this is not a battle you can participate in. Even I don't know if I can win against him. I'll hold him back, you go find Dorn for support. Go quickly. As soon as your words fell, accompanied by a roar that suddenly resounded all around, you stomped heavily on the incomparably hard palace ground, and your whole body, like a cannonball fired from a muzzle, rapidly launched a terrifying charge towards Fulgrim's direction with astonishing momentum. At the same time, Fulgrim, whose face suddenly turned gloomy, also abruptly activated his purple gold power armor, and the piercing sword tightly held in his palm swiftly obscured your field of vision like flashes of lightning. Chi. In an instant, one of your thick arms, transformed into a flesh cleaver, suddenly underwent other changes, rapidly condensing into a terrifying tentacle covered with octopus suckers, which heavily tore through the ash-filled air like a flesh whip, rapidly entangling towards Fulgrim's lower body. However, Fulgrim, who was incredibly agile in both attack speed and movement, had already dodged your first attack. In the next second, countless sword lights constantly transformed from the repeatedly swung piercing sword almost completely landed on your body. Ka. A large number of fragments of the adamantium restraint armor, along with colorful bone scales, flew everywhere, and countless spurting scarlet blood flowed all over your body. But at the same time, you, who were enduring Fulgrim's 1,000 cuts, did not produce any negative emotions. Because you suddenly realized that this vast Primarch body, filled with mystery and the unknown, was rapidly undergoing corresponding adaptive changes. Countless broken and reborn colorful bone scales were rapidly fusing and gathering, eventually forming a set of flesh-powered armor, completely made of a cobalt blue thick bone armor as the defensive shell, with the scorching blood, deeply buried beneath the shell and flowing back and forth throughout the body, serving as a powerful source of power. Roar. You couldn't help but raise your head and let out a roar that echoed all around. The pale blue bone shell above your neck completely transformed into thick bone armor, firmly encasing your entire head. Only the skyward pointing braid that danced in the wind and the pair of eyes that gleamed with scarlet light remained. You instantly felt a terrifying power flowing freely through every inch of your flesh and blood. This power did not come from the high heaven's psychic energy. Rather, it came from a gene ascension that had undergone extremely mysterious ancient genetic engineering modifications and had devoured and fused with the essence of countless alien flesh and blood. Rumble. Your heavy feet, encased in the pale blue bone shell, sank deeply into the solid ground, and a large number of spider web-like cracks were rapidly spreading around you. After a moment, your already massive size, amplified by the flesh and blood power armor, actually broke through the 5-meter limit. And facing Fulgrim, who had not yet entered, or rather, dared not enter, the demon prince form and was only a little over 3 meters tall. You were now clearly more like a true demon prince than him. Oh, my brother, you really know how to bring me more surprises. Fulgrim, with a smile that was not a smile on his face, shouted loudly at you in an exaggerated tone. The narrow blade in his palm instantly transformed into 2 curved warblades entwined with purple light, and while his footsteps shifted back and forth, he also slashed fiercely towards the chest of your flesh and blood power armor. Chi, chi, chi. Along with the sudden burst of 4 pale blue bone limbs, stained with a large amount of scarlet blood, from the depths of your broad spine. The pale blue bone limbs, whose attack speed and even flexibility were on par with the 2 purple warblades, also rapidly stabbed towards Fulgrim, who was close at hand. Kacha. In the blink of an eye, the 2 curved warblades, tightly held in Fulgrim's palm and entwined with purple light, deeply embedded themselves in your chest, with a large amount of bone armor shell and scarlet blood splattering everywhere. But at the same time, the 4 pale blue bone limbs that you rapidly slashed through the air and stabbed towards Fulgrim almost without exception pierced through the opponent's power armor and heavy body. However, Fulgrim, who had just suffered heavy damage, instead revealed a twisted and ferocious smile. His brow full of joy, he continued to push the curved warblades in his palm with force, wanting to take the opportunity to tear the wound and completely split open your entire chest. You seemed completely devoid of pain and fear. Your eyes emitting scarlet light, you suddenly raised your 2 thick arms encased in bone armor. You grabbed Fulgrim's arms, and your 10 fingers had instantly transformed into terrifying tentacles covered with suckers, firmly entangling the opponent's entire arm. Immediately afterwards, you stomped your feet fiercely on the ground and shook your entire head with force, smashing it fiercely towards Fulgrim's head. Rumble. Along with the sound of flesh colliding that suddenly echoed all around, and the shockwaves that suddenly erupted. Fulgrim, who was forcibly restrained in front of you, had almost half of his enchanting face, including his entire straight nose bridge, completely collapsed. Aha! Fulgrim, who subconsciously let out a cry of pleasure from his mouth, spat out purple blood while suddenly raising a heavy magnetic boot, and then heavily kicked you in the chest and abdomen. Rumble. The opponent's sudden powerful force also caused the terrifying tentacles you used to imprison his arms to suddenly break apart. Your entire body, along with the pale blue bone limbs that pierced through the opponent's flesh, flew heavily backwards towards the ground. Ding ding ding. At this moment, already in midair, you quickly reacted. The 4 pale blue bone limbs, as flexible as arms, slashed through the air and deeply inserted into the ground, completely stopping your massive body in midair. In the next moment, whether it was the serious injury you had just inflicted on Fulgrim, or all the damage the opponent had inflicted on you, they were actually healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. You forcefully spat out a mouthful of overly hot air. You slightly twisted your creaking thick neck. Your scarlet gaze never left Fulgrim's tall figure. Dong dong dong. Your heavy feet landed heavily, and while the pale blue bone limbs quickly retracted into your body, your 2 thick arms, completely restored to their original state, also simultaneously emitted extremely violent wriggling changes. In an instant, a limb scythe resembling a blood scythe and a distinctly angular bone warhammer became your 2 most familiar flesh and blood melee weapons. Traitor, come again. Your eyes scarlet, you roared loudly at Fulgrim, who was also gripping the curved warblades, in an almost roaring tone. Rumble. along with the sound of footsteps like thunder. One by one, clearly visible large pit depressions appeared behind you and Fulgrim respectively. Dong dong dong. However, at this moment, just as you were rapidly waving the limb scythe and bone iron fist, about to collide fiercely with Fulgrim rushing towards you. Inside a hidden passage located below the palace city walls, a tall figure, holding a huge adamantine shield and the chainsword Storm's Teeth, wearing a set of golden power armor, suddenly and fiercely attacked Fulgrim's flank. Fulgrim. In the next moment, Rogel Dorn, with a head of white hair, like a speeding metal chariot, crashed into the side of Fulgrim's body, and the chainsword Storm's Teeth, tightly held in his palm, also slashed fiercely behind the opponent's spine. Chi. 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 At the same time, the limb scythe and bone warhammer that you transformed from your thick arms also fell on top of Fulgrim's head and deep into his shoulder blades respectively. In an instant, a large amount of purple blood and shattered flesh and bones splattered frantically from Fulgrim's tall body, falling on the armor shells of you and Rogel Dorn. Cool awe. However, just as Fulgrim, after letting out a cry of pleasure, subconsciously wanted to unfold the demon prince form. Just as a serpentine tail had just emerged from below his body, and the opponent's body was expanding and increasing in size, he was completely expelled back to the high heavens by the psychic power of the Emperor that enveloped the entire palace. Boom boom boom. Accompanying the psychic storm sweeping around and the demon-possessed body of Fulgrim completely disappearing. Winter. The massive adamantium shield in Rogel Dorn's palm slammed heavily onto the ground, creating clear cracks that spread in all directions. His hair as white as snow, he stared expressionlessly at you, whose thick arms were gradually returning to their original state. His low, emotionless voice quickly reached your ears. Look at you now, where is there any semblance of humanity left? You shouldn't even be on the front lines. Do you know how much of a mental shock this will give to the loyalist factions of the entire Imperium? It even casts a shadow on the Emperor's majesty. At this moment, your eyes still bloodshot, you vigorously shook the flesh-fused power armor on your massive body. You rotated your head, the topknot dancing in the wind, and looked down at Rogel Dorn's stern, bronze face, saying in a hoarse voice. If it weren't truly inappropriate to have infighting right now, I'd really like to punch you in the face. Rogel Dorn, I just fought off Fulgrim who infiltrated the inner walls of Terra for Terra and the Emperor, and you're saying this to me. That was because the Emperor's psychic barrier expelled Fulgrim. Your contribution is only a small part. Rogel Dorn, expressionless, carefully examined you from head to toe. He said solemnly to you. At this moment, you, struggling to control your massive body, couldn't help but take a deep breath. One of your palms instantly clenched into a fist, but in the end, you didn't strike him. Dorn, I'm not going to argue with you now. Quickly allocate some flesh resources or nutrient fluids that can replenish energy. I feel that this powerful, ever-changing shell is showing signs of losing control. I don't want to devour the broken corpses of any loyalist combat personnel. Your eyes even more bloodshot, you said to him in a low voice. Rogel Dorn, slowly raising his massive adamantium shield, paused for a moment. He immediately activated his golden power armor and strode towards a hidden entrance below the walls of Terra. I told you that you shouldn't have stepped onto the battlefield. Come with me, estranged brother. Rogel Dorn said to you without looking back. You snorted subconsciously, moved your massive frame, and quickly followed behind him. Soon after, under the silent gaze of many Imperial fists and other loyalist Astartes, you and Rogel Dorn returned to the inner sanctum of the Bob Bastion, belonging to the Supreme Commander of the Terra Defense. Subsequently, a contingent of custodes who had long followed and protected Rogel Dorn seemed to recognize your true identity at a glance. They wanted to immediately attack you, but Rogel Dorn sternly stopped their impending assault. At this moment, your bloodshot eyes forcibly suppressed the fleshly cravings from deep within your powerful body. You stared intently at those taciturn custodes, the terrifying thought even rising in your mind of whether to devour one to analyze the structure of their flesh and blood. You vigorously shook your heavy head, shifting your attention elsewhere. Not long after, a squad of Imperial fists transported a large amount of relatively fresh grox meat and nutrient fluids into the room within the Northern Strategic Command. Quickly removing your flesh-fused power armor, you pounced on the meat like a hungry tiger, launching a fierce assault. Standing behind a large strategic map, Rogel Dorn glanced at you with a complex expression, Then he opened his mouth to ask you if the nanite mechanical tide on the battlefield was your doing. While melting and absorbing the large quantities of meat and nutrient fluids from your constantly writhing and deforming body surface, you confirmed it without turning your head. About half an hour later, all the energetic substances completely entered your powerful body, gradually stabilizing the nearly out-of-control flesh rampage. Sigismund told me that you said to tell him that you are the 22nd Primarch of the future of the human Imperium. Does this then represent that this siege of Terra is the Emperor's ultimate victory? At this moment, Rogel Dorn, who had been staring at the strategic map for a long time, suddenly turned to ask you. If that can be called a victory, then consider it so. You slightly opened your tightly closed eyes. You slowly propped up your towering body, which had returned to a height of about 4 meters, from the ground, and stared at Rogel Dorn not far away, saying, "For the countless mortal warriors and Astartes on Terra, this is a great rebellion fanned by the Warmaster Horus, but for the other Primarchs and even the Emperor himself, the price to be paid is far more than that. Dorn, do you see those chaos demons outside the walls, almost as numerous as the sea? Those are the claws of the 4 chaos gods in the warp, and they are the ones who planned and promoted the true occurrence of this siege war. Are you still expecting Guilliman's reinforcements to arrive on Terra, and then wipe out the traitors in one fell swoop? I can tell you plainly that from the moment the warp storm completely envelops Terra, all of us will become turtles in a jar for chaos. Guilliman and his ultramarines will always be 9 hours away from reaching Terra. In a sense, you are not important, I am not important, and even the other brothers on Terra are not important. This is a calamity belonging to the Emperor, and only the Emperor can break the situation. All we can do, and the true purpose of my descent here, is perhaps to mend some of the dire situations on the battlefield, and try to delay more time for the Emperor, so that the future losses of the entire human Imperium can be reduced a little." You took a deep breath. You said to Rogel Dorn with an indifferent expression. At this moment, you clearly felt the emotional fluctuations rising and falling within Rogel Dorn's tall body. Soon after, Rogel Dorn, who had quickly digested some important information, seemed to have returned to a state of calm. Expressionless, he turned to stare at you, asking in a low voice. Then, "Estranged brother, can you tell me, what should we do now?" At this moment, you paused slightly upon hearing his question. "Dorn, do your best to handle the defense plans and command duties of this siege war, and I intend to use this powerful Primarch body and my undying soul to trade one for one with the other traitor Primarchs. For example, Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, who poses a great threat to Terra. Perturabo, Primarch of the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, the Hammer of Olympia, the Lord of Iron. Perturabo, known for his construction skills and siege tactics, possesses a glass heart but is also a workhorse. He is often compared to Rogel Dorn, who excels at defense and is extremely rigid in personality. In everyone's eyes, iron and stone is probably the best phrase to describe this pair of rivals. Even if we were to analyze the personalities of each of the traitor Primarchs, then almost all of the traitor Primarchs are mentally ill patients, madmen, or overgrown man-children lacking fatherly love, and of course, there are those who are simply mindless. But the Lord of Iron, Perturabo, is perhaps the only one who genuinely wants to completely overthrow the false Emperor's rule, making him the most diligent rebel. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that his mental state is any more normal than the other traitor Primarchs. But in this siege of Terra that you are experiencing, there isn't a single traitor Primarch who has contributed more or caused more damage than Perturabo. Rumble. The magnificent city walls standing in the morning light are becoming increasingly dilapidated. Along the long battle line not far from the Terra Imperial Palace, all kinds of wrecked vehicles and charred corpses are scattered everywhere, covered in a thick layer of ashen snowflakes. And with a series of earth-shattering roars. Thousands of god engines, as huge as mountains, are engaged in a terrifying life-or-death contest on the complex terrain. Buzz buzz buzz. Instantly, countless laser destructor cannons and volcano cannons erupt in deafening roars. The ensuing terrifying shockwaves and downward radiating searing heat are enough to tear apart and melt those unlucky souls who haven't taken refuge deep within the bunkers. Once the layers of azure void shields are destroyed at their weak points or overloaded and disappear, those god machines that are successfully hit by powerful artillery fire or launch melee attacks fall heavily to the ground like collapsing mountains. At this moment, similar magnificent scenes can be said to be playing out between the enemy and us every minute and every second. But as time goes on, even though the loyalist Titan legions are fighting to the death, without tarnishing their loyalty to the Emperor. However, faced with the enemy's continuous reinforcements, or the rampant assaults of Chaos Greater Demons, they are gradually heading towards defeat. Thump thump thump. At this moment, 25 Warlord-class Psychic Titans from the Ordo Sinister, accompanied by more terrifying artillery fire cover, quickly stepped out of the dilapidated city walls surrounding the Imperial Palace. Almost immediately, they used precious and rare vortex weapons to launch continuous and deadly bombardments against the ubiquitous Titans and enemy units that posed a significant threat. These Psychic Titans, completely driven by Psykers, are apocalyptic weapons created using forbidden technology from the Dark Age of technology, specifically designed to deal with warp demons. Now that they too have had to step onto the entire battlefield of Terra, it also represents that the Emperor has completely thrown the last of his hidden power into this meat grinder. At this moment, away from the Titan battlefield, inside a bunker, you slightly shifted your golden glowing magnetic boots. Through the lenses of your adamantium helmet, you stared at a Chaos Titan that had been completely torn apart, its body flashing with explosive flames as it crashed to the ground, followed by an even more violent secondary explosion. You took a deep breath. You quickly turned around and vigorously waved your huge, adamantium-clad hand at approximately 2 combat squads of Imperial fists behind you. In fact, the golden power armor you are currently wearing is exactly the same as Rogel Dorn's auric armor, and even your massive size has been altered to be as close to his as possible. If you were to keep your adamantium helmet on at all times, probably not many people could truly recognize your true identity. And this is precisely the ingenious plan that you and Rogel Dorn came up with after a somewhat unpleasant verbal exchange. You will wear a set of Rogel Dorn's spare power armor, and in his name, conduct what appears to be a risky decapitation strike against Perturabo, in order to lure him out of hiding. Otherwise, as the supreme commander of the rebellion, and currently holding the battlefield advantage, the Lord of Iron would definitely not allow a stranger like you to have the opportunity to fight him. But if this target is replaced by Rogel Dorn, who, out of concern for the Emperor and Terra, has decided to take a gamble, then the Lord of Iron, Perturabo, will definitely accept the challenge. Thump thump thump, accompanied by the sound of magnetic boots rapidly stomping on the ground. You, or rather, Rogel Dorn, are leading this slightly strange acting group of Imperial fists, infiltrating deeper into the enemy's battlefield. After you have silently traveled a certain distance, in order to make the whole process look more realistic, and to attract the attention of the Lord of Iron, you immediately drove the auric armor, leaping from the depths of a dilapidated trench filled with corpses onto the surface. You suddenly brandished an extremely heavy and massive adamantium shield, and a sharp blade in your palm. Without hesitation, you launched a terrifying charge towards a squad of iron warriors who had just emerged from the defensive fortifications. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the terrifying speed, far exceeding the reaction capabilities of the Astartes, allowed you to instantly knock away an unlucky iron warrior. Immediately afterward, the adamantium shield and sharp blade, swung back and forth, almost like cutting melons and vegetables, chopped these iron warriors, who were repeatedly pulling the triggers of their bolt guns, into scattered pieces of flesh and blood. At the same time, the Imperial fists, whose movements and steps could be said to be uniform, also rushed into the interior of the defensive fortifications. They all simultaneously pulled the triggers of the bolt guns and meltaguns in their palms. At this moment, seeing the heavy weapons in those surrounding defensive fortifications quickly turning their firing direction, without any hesitation, you issued guerrilla warfare orders to the 20 Imperial fists who were attacking. Subsequently, all of you, while enduring the hail of bullets that brushed past your power armor in the turbid air, launched a merciless killing raid on the Iron Warriors' most heavily fortified battle lines. Now, everything is basically ready, all that's missing is the Lord of Iron. For ordinary Astartes, a fully armed Primarch is an all-encompassing and lethal force. At this moment, your powerful flesh and blood body, replenished with a large amount of energy, drives the power armor, almost transforming into a golden lightning bolt, weaving back and forth between countless defensive fortifications. Each time you forcefully swing the heavy adamantium shield in your palm, or the huge, sharp blade, many iron warriors who don't have time to dodge become your victims. Even as a large number of bolter rounds and heavy firepower, accompanied by terrifying roars, lock onto your towering figure. As long as the trajectory isn't aimed directly at vital areas like the head. You show no signs of dodging at all, but instead, enduring the Iron Warrior's most proficient ranged firepower, you continue your astonishing massacre of the traitor Astartes. After all, for you now, the heavy armor is not your defense, but a metal cage that restricts your combat power. Boom boom boom. Just then, you and the Imperial Fist's Astartes successfully inflict heavy casualties on the Iron Warriors. Accompanied by the engine roar clearly transmitted to your ears, a series of Thunderhawk gunships, gleaming with the original color of steel, rapidly reveal their massive bodies in midair. However, just as you intend to find the surrounding heavy firepower that hasn't been destroyed yet, and have a warm exchange with these Thunderhawk gunships. Boom! In an instant, 6 metal robots, each several meters tall and completely covered in steel armor, crash down from the gunship's hold. Iron Circle robots. It seems the big fish I've been waiting for has finally taken the bait. You carefully scrutinize these Iron Circle robots, which have replaced the Terminator guard, through your helmet's lenses. You shake your head slightly, muttering to yourself. The next second, a tall figure wearing incredibly heavy, specialized Terminator armor, the lexicon pattern, like a metal mountain, suddenly cuts through the ash-filled air and crashes heavily onto the ground. My poor brother. Why don't you continue guarding your damned walls? I was still looking forward to seeing more expressions on your face when my sons finally set foot in the Imperial Palace. At this moment, Perturabo, slowly raising a steel fist, shouts in a deep voice towards you, his face clearly revealing an undisguised arrogance. Instantly, the 6 Iron Circle robots, wielding melee weapons and carrying large caliber cannons on their backs, quickly surround him, forming a defensive formation as solid as a steel wall. Heh, Dorn complained to me before, saying you were brave but lack wisdom. Now it seems, he was absolutely right, Perturabo. The moment his words fall, you slowly activate your golden glowing power armor. As the distance between the two sides continues to close, you casually remove the adamantium helmet from your head. What? You're not Dorn. I've never seen you, but I think your appearance is familiar, damn it. Not one of my brothers told me you were still alive. Perturabo, his facial expression first filled with doubt, then rapidly shifting to shock, roars at you. Even the metal cables deeply embedded in his head seem to tremble slightly due to his overly agitated emotions. Or is it that the shameless false emperor, in order to prolong his survival, even has to bring back a dead man like you? At this moment, Perturabo's roaring voice constantly echoes in your ears, even suppressing the distant explosions. You take a deep breath and slowly let out a sigh. Seeing the genuine emotion he is displaying at this moment, you say to him indifferently. This Primarch's shell is indeed his, you're not mistaken, but I am not. 11. I am the 22nd Primarch of the human empire. However, the next second, Perturabo seems slightly stunned upon hearing the truth. But the emotions he expresses become even more agitated. No, I will not acknowledge you as my brother. Because that damned false emperor treated all of us as tools to rule the empire, and you are just a plaything he can discard at any time. Immediately afterwards, the steel cannons located behind the lexicon pattern power armor suddenly rotate, then lock firmly onto your towering figure. Subsequently, Perturabo, his expression gradually turning ferocious, roars at you hoarsely. Tell the false emperor, your world will be destroyed in this siege warfare filled with death, despair, and crimson. Tell Dorn, your hope and pride will be reduced to nothing under our army. Tell all the mortals on Terra, their empty whispers are no longer heard by the gods, because the gods will die, killed by human logic. Tell those stubborn Astartes, the death angel from Horus has already descended upon the earth. And you, a mere fake Primarch, nothing can save you now. At this moment, you listen carefully to Perturabo's almost insane proclamation with a blank expression. You slightly twist your neck, which is gradually spreading with bone-like scales, and nod at him with an icy gaze. The only lesson I can understand is, never get close to chaos, it will make you unfortunate or mentally retarded. Look, you can't even speak basic human language anymore. David, take action immediately. You suddenly shout loudly towards those Imperial fists around you who haven't moved. In an instant, as a large swarm of nano-machines, like a dark cloud, erupts from the empty power armor. Perturbo's mad bombardment completely covers your location. However, for the Iron Man David, who has now transformed into a swarm of nano-machines, purely physical shells are just a dessert to replenish energy consumption. The next second, you stomp hard on the ground, and a cracked and sunken pit appears beneath your magnetic boots. Your whole body leaps high into the air like a great metal bird spreading its wings, then crashes heavily towards Perturbo. Perturbo, I'm here to send you on your way. Boom boom boom. In an instant, large caliber shells piercing through the ash-filled snowflakes continuously detonated against your power armor, erupting in terrifying bursts of fiery light. Large quantities of adamantium shards and shattered servo mechanisms sprayed outwards from your towering form in all directions. Even so, you, like a metallic meteor, crashed heavily onto the ground not far from Perturbo. One of your thick arms, its armored shell shattered and mangled, abruptly transformed, forming a grotesque tentacle covered in sharp thorns, and swept forcefully towards the Iron Circle robots forming a defensive line. Boom! 2 Iron Circle robots, gripping melee weapons and heavy shields, were directly swatted away by your grotesque tentacle, tumbling heavily across the ground into the distance. However, the remaining Iron Circle robots immediately filled the gap in the defensive formation, using a barrage of heavy bolter rounds to keep you separated from Perturbo by a seemingly insurmountable distance. Just then, the nanite swarm controlled by Iron Man David suddenly surged over your head, a massive cloud-like entity ferociously launching a frenzied consumption attack against the Iron Circle robots ahead. Within a mere dozen seconds, one Iron Circle robot, desperately trying to break free, was completely engulfed and disappeared, while the remaining Iron Circle robots were covered in pitted and corroded marks. CHZZ. The next moment, having just shifted your direction of attack, you were once again precisely covered in a barrage of fire from Perturbo, impacting your towering form. Streams of incredibly scorching melta-blasts forcibly melted away most of the power armor on your body. At this moment, you, constantly staggering backward, subconsciously let out a roar of rage that echoed all around. As large amounts of power armor fragments continued to melt away, your entire form rapidly expanded. Immediately afterwards, a layer of exceptionally thick, pale blue bone armor completely enveloped your entire body, temporarily isolating you from the damage caused by the melta weaponry. Thump thump thump. Having re-equipped yourself with flesh and blood power armor, you locked your gaze firmly onto Perturbo, who was a dozen meters away. Once again, you launched a terrifying charge towards your opponent with astonishing momentum. Boom! You forcefully swept forward with your thick arms, which had once again transformed into a large scythe and a bone hammer, smashing 2 Iron Circle robots returning from the distance heavily onto the ground. Buzz buzz buzz. The next moment, the nanite swarm, having completely consumed 3 Iron Circle robots and now changing its direction of attack, attempting to pounce on Perturbo at the opportune moment, was completely blocked by a volley of stasis grenades thrown into the air by Perturbo. Bang bang bang. Accompanied by layers of stasis fields erupting violently, the nanite swarm, currently the greatest threat to Perturbo, as well as the 2 Iron Circle robots that had not yet risen from the ground, were heavily encased, unable to move for a short period of time. And just as the stasis grenades appeared, you had already shifted your heavy feet, performing a necessary dodge to the side. Your towering form almost narrowly brushed past the edge of the stasis field. You took a deep breath, staring at Perturbo ahead and continuing your charge. At this moment, the only Iron Circle robot still able to move immediately handed a furnace breaker, Warhammer, shaped like a large wrench, into Perturbo's palm. Ha! Perturbo, his expression twisted, suddenly let out a roar that echoed all around. He actually propelled his power armor, like a metal hill, and took heavy strides towards you. The furnace breaker, Warhammer, which he swung with all his might, constantly emanating strands of slender lightning, smashed heavily down towards the top of your head. At this moment, reacting quickly, you instantly halted your forward charge, dodging the attack while one of your thick arms, transformed into a large scythe, suddenly extended forward. In an instant, the sharp edge formed from flesh and blood slashed heavily through the air, chopping down heavily towards Perturbo's head, which was mostly covered by thick armor. Boom! Accompanied by the ear-piercing shriek of the furnace breaker Warhammer as it rubbed against the air, strands of terrifying lightning blooming in the air, along with the heavy wrench head, smashed heavily onto your broad shoulders. Countless pieces of pale blue bone armor flew outwards in all directions, and a thick arm, a bloody mess, was almost completely severed from your towering form, with only a few strands of wriggling, active flesh still connecting it. But at the same time, your expression almost deranged, also forcefully and quickly thrust the extended large scythe through the opponent's thick armor, chopping heavily into the depths of Perturbo's neck. If that one iron circle robot still able to move hadn't been instantly used by Perturbo to block your forcefully pulling side arm, the damage you could have inflicted would probably have been far more than this. CHZZCHZZCHZZ. The next second, before Perturbo, who was about to roar in rage, could react, four bone-like limbs, suddenly piercing through flesh from the back of your broad spine, rapidly stabbed forward, then heavily pierced through Perturbo's towering form. However, at this moment, Perturbo, his expression becoming even more twisted and ferocious, actually casually abandoned the furnace breaker Warhammer in his palm. He abruptly pressed a pair of melta gauntlets located on the upper part of his arm armor firmly against the front of your bone chestplate, then unhesitatingly pulled the trigger. Boom boom boom. Streams of scorching melta blasts, at point-blank range, erupted violently in front of your chest. Almost in the blink of an eye, they completely evaporated most of the flesh tissue inside your chest, revealing a terrifying melted hole in those pale blue bones that seemed to have melted little. You seemed completely unfazed by such serious injuries. You abruptly raised that broken, severed arm that had just finished healing, and swiftly pierced a hard bone spur, constantly extending outwards from your palm, through Perturbo's heart. Pitiful traitor brother, for the Emperor, and for the future of the Imperium of Man, let us go together. Your eyes bloodshot, you stared at Perturbo's eyes, filled with endless rage and unwillingness, and the scarlet blood repeatedly surging up from his mouth, and grinned in a low voice. Immediately afterwards, a melta bomb in the process of being activated actually squirmed upwards from the depths of your throat, and was completely revealed in front of Perturbo's eyes through your mouth, which was open to the extreme. 22. At this moment, Perturbo, constantly spewing out more blood from his mouth, couldn't help but let out a muddled roar filled with rage and despair. But your expression ferocious, still unhesitatingly activated the melta bomb held in your mouth with your tongue. Rumble rumble. As the dazzling light suddenly lit up from your mouth, and the violent fluctuations of the teleportation beacon on the opponent's body, the terrifying scorching heat completely engulfed your and Perturbo's towering forms, which were entangled together with all their might. Did you die? Simulation ended. Time elapsed. Unknown. Available options to retain from this simulation. Forgebreaker, Thunderhammer, Primarch. Note: this is a legendary warhammer forged by Primarch Fulgrim and Primarch Ferrus Manus during a forging competition. Note: this perfect warhammer, personally crafted by the Phoenix of the Imperium, also symbolizes the brotherly bond between the Purple Phoenix and the Gorgon. Note: its appearance resembles a greatly enlarged pipe wrench, but the nearly indestructible metal material more than compensates for its appearance. Fulgrim's wholehearted perfectionism has also given the Forgebreaker a combat feel that perfectly suits its wielder, and the balanced hammerhead, after being modified by Perturbo, can release a large amount of thunderous power the moment it strikes an enemy. Note: sadly, the Forgebreaker, once a symbol of brotherly affection, was given by its creator, the fallen Fulgrim, to Horus after the death of Ferrus Manus. Horus, still possessing some reason, gifted it to Perturbo to buy the loyalty of his brother. Ultimately, this warhammer unexpectedly appeared deep within the Blood Raven's armory. Note: a headless, immense figure is silently watching you from the depths of the warp. 2. Perturbo, Armor of Laws, Primarch. Note: the Armor of Laws is a highly specialized Terminator power armor, personally designed and manufactured by Primarch Perturbo. Note: this power armor is equipped with an extremely complex command and control system, allowing Perturbo to personally control any combat unit under his command. Note: in addition, the power armor is equipped with a large number of ranged weapons exceeding normal specifications, as well as various auxiliary systems created by Perturbo himself, sufficient to comprehensively enhance the wearer's ranged firepower, such as the Melta wrist cannon mounted on the arm armor and the teleportation beacon located inside the armor. Note: Of course, to completely control this power armor belonging to the Primarch, one must learn from Perturbo and implant various neural connection devices into the cerebral cortex to perfectly control all functions of the power armor. Note: Iron warriors on the front lines, move the lascannon forward 50 meters immediately. Perturbo roared into the communication device while playing a real-time strategy game. 3. Sulfuric saliva gland, Rogel Dorn's offering, Primarch. Note: this is a sulfuric saliva gland created using Rogel Dorn's oral cells. It will be implanted next to your saliva gland located on your lower lip, synthesizing and functioning in a very simple manner. Note: it seems to have been enhanced and blessed by the Emperor. Note: its existence will immediately grant you immunity to the corrosion of sulfuric saliva and the special ability to secrete large amounts of sulfuric saliva. Furthermore, due to the silent blessing of Primarch Rogel Dorn, you may be able to track the true whereabouts of other Primarchs within a certain range through a special connection between them. Note: no matter what the future holds, I believe my Primarch brothers will find me. Rogel Dorn, having cut off a gigantic hand with a broken blade, gazed at the terrifying enemies not far away, muttering with an incomparably grave expression. Note: I seem to see that the future of the human Imperium, and even the entire galaxy, requires all of you Primarchs to fight side by side. When necessary, bring them all back. The heavily injured Emperor, sitting on the golden throne, used her last bit of strength to gently instruct you as the stasis field activated. The simulation has just ended. Who? Rorschach quickly opened his tightly closed eyes. He subconsciously exhaled, then immediately turned to look at Iron Man David beside him. At the same time, seemingly following Rorschach's awakening and return, the blue light gradually lit up inside Iron Man David's eye sockets. My lord, we have successfully returned. Iron Man David slightly rotated his metal head. He gazed at Rorschach beside the metal round table and said, David, thank you for your hard work. Can you see anything now? Like a reward bestowed by the Emperor or something? Rorschach, with a calm expression, nodded his chin. He squinted his eyes and spoke to Iron Man David. Immediately afterward, Iron Man David probed his metal body back and forth, shaking his metal head in Rorschach's direction. My lord, I have not seen anything. When you chose to perish together with Primarch Perturbo, I, enveloped by the stasis field, returned in sync as well. And if I'm not mistaken, this training mechanism is always centered on you. Being able to bring someone in might just be a reward. At this moment, upon hearing Iron Man David's words, Rorschach subconsciously shifted his gaze to the simulator's page. His eyes moved quickly as he scanned the text annotations above. Then, Rorschach unhesitatingly chose one of the enhancement surgeries, Rogel Dorn's offering. In the next moment, under Iron Man David's silent gaze, Rorschach, whose bronze face twitched a few times, suddenly changed his expression. He abruptly puffed out his cheeks and spat outwards, a stream of clear liquid like an arrow rapidly splashing in the middle of the metal round table. Chi, along with wisps of rapidly rising pungent smoke. The plastic steel metal round table was actually corroded by Rorschach's saliva, instantly creating a large hole about half a meter in diameter. However, at this time, Rorschach did not focus his attention on the power of the sulfuric saliva. The simulator's reward page for selecting the enhancement surgery had not disappeared. Instead, it remained within his field of vision. Could it be that Iron Man David's training reward belongs to me? Could it be possible to make a second reward selection? Rorschach, unable to resist blinking his eyes, subconsciously raised a palm. In the next second, that Primarch weapon that once belonged to Primarch Ferrus Manus, and later fell into Perturbo's hands, the Thunder Hammer, Forgebreaker, suddenly appeared in his palm. All right, David, it seems that the credit for bringing someone along for training still belongs to me. It's a pity that the reward didn't include that Iron Man General's metal body, otherwise, perhaps I could have let you upgrade. At this moment, Rorschach, wielding the Forgebreaker Warhammer, whose weight and feel were very suitable, turned his head and said excitedly to Iron Man David. My lord, this is originally an extra reward you deserve, and I also deeply understand that your training process is not easy, requiring you to constantly face Primarchs or even more powerful enemies who are like myths and legends. Iron Man David, slowly rising to his feet, sighed and said, Fortunately, I am a mechanical life form. If it were someone else, merely facing those large-scale, terrifying wars would be enough to feel unbearable mental pressure. In the brightly lit, large training ground, without wearing power armor, Rourke wielded a blood scythe wreathed in green light in one hand, and a breaker warhammer with lightning snakes coiling around it in the other, moving back and forth, accompanied by sharp buzzing sounds cutting through the air and whistling through the void. Dozens of Aquine Guard servitors, each gripping a chainsword in their mechanical tentacles, flew backwards into the air like a scattering of celestial flowers, before crashing heavily onto the metal floor. The next second, Rourke, acting on bestial instinct, suddenly turned his head. His suddenly bulging mouth sprayed a large cloud of sulfuric acid saliva like a volley of arrows towards an Aquine Guard servitor attempting to sneak up on him. Chi, with a large amount of acrid smoke rising. Most of the metal shell of the Aquine Guard servitor's writhing serpentine body was instantly corroded away. Immediately afterwards, the breaker warhammer, gripped tightly in Rourke's palm, carrying a terrifying roar and striking lightning, slammed heavily onto the opponent's metal head. Boom! After this, unlucky Aquine Guard servitor was completely reduced to a broken and scrapped state. Rourke slightly twisted his muscular, thick neck, temporarily ceasing his repeated torment of the intellect-controlled legion. Then, carrying the two melee weapons, he shook his tall body and turned to walk towards the edge of the training ground. At this moment, many base garrison personnel from the stormtroopers and lamenters dispersed the crowd of onlookers, clearing the way for the Primarch to leave. Rourke, with a calm expression, nodded his graying head towards them, brushing past the adoring crowd. For Rourke at the moment, a single type of intellect-controlled legion was not enough to get him into a fighting state. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't want to find the Astartes to spar with him. But once he used melee weapons, apart from the champions from the Raven Guard and a few company commanders from the Lamenters who could exchange a few blows with Rourke in an unarmored state, ordinary Astartes found it difficult to withstand the repeated attacks of great force. And if the Astartes were fully armed to fight, Rourke, gradually entering a fighting state, was afraid of hammering a few unlucky ones to death on the spot. After all, according to the Lamenter's luck, this kind of situation was not impossible. Soon after, Rourke, who had stored the two melee weapons in the storage page, arrived at the base hall. He sat down at the metal round table that had just been replaced with vibranium material, eating while dealing with the business selected by Iron Man David. Now, the mobile hive city plan assigned to the mutant nation was gradually entering the initial engineering phase. In addition to their own mineral resources, a large amount of minerals would continuously flow into the area from Europe and even the Americas, assisting the mutants in building a production line dedicated to casting large mechanical creations as soon as possible. At the same time, Zheng Xian, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., who had not shown up for a long time, also sent a warm invitation to Iron Man David, wanting to continue deepening the cooperative relationship between the two parties. However, Rourke did not immediately approve this matter. He planned to let Iron Man David continue to whet the other party's appetite. At least, he needed to wait until the mutant nation had completed the construction of the first mobile hive city before conducting more contact with the Asian side. Even if Rourke tried his best to maintain a balance. After all, there was still a difference in closeness, and appropriately increasing the competitive pressure between the two parties would also reduce more trouble. A few days later, most of the local affairs no longer required Rourke to care about. He believed that all team members would do their job within the scope of their responsibilities. So, Rourke was preparing to return to the ravenous shark fleet. Because compared to the local affairs and development, the Warhammer universe's responsibility was even heavier. Just as Iron Man David was mobilizing the necessary supplies needed by a large number of fleets in the base, Rourke, who had not yet received the Starfire Glory power armor sent back by Redditus, got up and went to the forge factory on secondary Sun Island. However, after Rourke stepped into the forge hall, he immediately saw the vibranium power armor being repeatedly and carefully debugged by countless automatic servitor robots on the forging platform. Redditus, what have you done to my power armor again? In my opinion, the more complex the system, the greater the chance of damage. It's better to maintain the most basic functions. After all, you also know that the combat environment back home is too harsh. Rourke, with a calm expression, slightly turned his head. He stared at the servo skull, which was driving the anti-gravity engine and floating back and forth in the air, and said lightly, "Ah, esteemed Primarch, I just made some fine-tuning to the overall armor system based on the feedback data, so that the Starfire glory fits your increasingly powerful flesh and blood body even better." Redditus, with red light flickering in its eye sockets, immediately changed its flight direction and quickly said, surrounding Rourke. At this moment, Rourke, who accidentally turned his gaze, suddenly noticed that the skull helmet placed on the forging platform seemed to be a little different. So, he shook his tall body and stepped forward to check it out. A few seconds later, Rourke, squinting his eyes, looked down at the Mind Stone inlaid in the center of the skull helmet's brow and let out a sigh. "I say, Redditus, what are you doing embedding the Mind Stone in the skull helmet? Although this is an extremely powerful manifestation of the universe's origin in the local world, in our old home, this is just a pretty stone with no use." At this moment, Redditus, hearing Rourke's words, quickly lowered its flight altitude. Its eye sockets flashed with excited red light, and it slowly said to Rourke next to him, "Primarch, you don't know, this is not just a simple decorative effect. Do you remember that the Infinity Gauntlet that controlled the Infinity Stones was dismantled by me? I didn't have any gains or research. Thanks to the plasticity and memory of the living metal, I actually managed to engrave a part of the runic symbols with the properties of absorbing, converting and releasing into it. That is to say, the skull helmet in front of you has some of the special functions of the Infinity Gauntlet. Of course, just like you said, the Infinity Stones are just the origin of the local universe. After leaving this place, they are more like useless waste. But I can guarantee to you that although it has not been tested in the field yet, when you put on the skull helmet, you can use the neural connection device inside the helmet to control the runic symbols to extract some powerful energy from the Mind Stone." As soon as Redditus's words fell, Rourke, whose eyes suddenly lit up, turned his head and asked the other party, "How powerful is this energy? Can it be compared to when it was in the local world? Can the activated Mind Stone still control the minds of any flesh and blood life?" Hearing Rourke's series of questions, Redditus, with red light flashing in its eye sockets, had to raise its pair of mechanical little hands. It shook back and forth while hurriedly explaining, "Stop, stop, stop. Primarch, being able to make the Mind Stone have some effect is already my limit. The special energy absorbed and extracted by the runic symbols is a destructive special energy that can be emitted by the user using the Mind Stone itself as a medium, but it will not have the characteristic of controlling the mind. In addition, I also gave this special energy and the way it is emitted a simple and easy to understand name. Mind Ray, Mind Energy Ray. This is a new offensive method that the tech priest Redditus has tried his best to add to the Starfire Glory Power armor. However, in Rourke's view, it is more like a vague memory from his past. That mechanical life form who possessed the Mind Stone as a source of power, Tony's offspring, Vision, used the Mind Stone in that way. The opponent seemed to be able to release powerful energy beams from the Mind Stone embedded deep in his forehead. If Redditus accidentally achieved this level, then this is probably one of the safe ways to use this source of the universe without completely activating it or using the Infinity Gauntlet. Of course, if there are no special circumstances in the future. The long-term owner of the Mind Stone, Vision, probably won't appear in the native world anymore. At this moment, a large number of thoughts flashed quickly through Rourke's mind. But what he is more concerned about is whether the Mind Stone can really play a role in the Warhammer universe. If it is simply extracting the energy inside the Mind Stone to release the Mind Energy Ray, it is estimated that there is absolutely no problem. But wanting to control the minds and memories of all flesh and blood life, just like in the native world, with the Mind Stone after it is completely activated, this is probably wishful thinking. Otherwise, Rourke could completely rely on the powerful ability of the Mind Stone to control the minds of all races in the entire galaxy. Directly cut off the roots of the chaos gods of the supreme heaven, and even starve them to death who feed on various emotions. However, at this time, Rourke, who had just finished listening to Redditus' explanation, finally shook his head. He took a deep breath. In the blink of an eye, he completely abandoned the ultimate fantasy that appeared in his mind. Soon after, Rourke, whose expression returned to calmness, was surrounded by a large number of automatic servo robots. He successfully put on the Starfire Glory Power armor, which had been adjusted for various functions. His thoughts moved slightly, and the wriggling living metal had recovered the entire head with the vibranium armor plates. At the same time, the Mind Stone embedded in the front of the helmet seemed to brighten slightly, and then there were no more special changes. Next, Rourke, who had readapted to the power armor, released the Mind Energy Ray with concentration under the guidance of Reditus. In judging from the destructive power and the degree of power of the Mind Energy Ray, it is not much weaker than ordinary melta weapons. Even under continuous release of attacks, even vibranium can be gradually melted and destroyed. So, Rourke now has one more long-range offensive method besides the 10 rings. So, he once again encouraged Reditus for his great contribution. And Rourke also subconsciously asked the other party if there were any additional requirements or forbidden technology experiments that needed to be approved. However, Reditus, who was driving the anti-gravity engine back and forth in midair for a long time, said to Rourke shyly, "If the Primarch is willing, it actually wants to follow Rourke back to the Warhammer universe to take a look." As for the specific reason, it was because Rourke had inadvertently revealed to Iron Man David before. The Carcharodon's fleet is on its way to the Forge world, the Far Eastern Forge, Triple Forge. According to Reditus, since Rourke cannot take it to Mars for pilgrimage for the time being, then let it have a more in-depth exchange with other tech priests and even tech magos first. And with the many precious knowledge it currently possesses, it is enough to gain great respect from a Forge world. In response, Rourke, who was thinking with his head down, did not refuse. He just ordered Reditus to make arrangements for the forging work in advance for a period of time. And for safety and insurance purposes, Reditus also needs to control the Micro-Knight Titan as the main body for this journey. Otherwise, a mere bolt or laser beam could completely scrap the servo-skull Reditus. Soon after, the two company commanders and the champion of the Raven Guard. In addition, Rourke, who had collected a large amount of supplies, and Reditus, who was controlling the Micro-Knight Titan, were ready to return to the Carcharodon's fleet. At this moment, they stood quietly on the metal floor of the circular square, waiting. Buzzing. The next moment, with a large amount of psychic energy constantly released by the Carcharodon's librarian Yukari, a spatial rift that gradually tore open suddenly appeared in front of everyone. Crack. As soon as one of Rourke's magnetic boots stepped out of the spatial rift, the powerful pressure suddenly applied to the power armor made him subconsciously activate the adsorption function of the magnetic boots. Chi-chi. The next second, after all the people who followed appeared, the seemingly unstable spatial rift suddenly disappeared into the humid air inside the ship. Kahu Lanchi. What happened to the fleet? Did it encounter an enemy attack? At this moment, Rourke, whose expression immediately became serious, turned his head. He stared at Librarian Kahu Lanchi, who had just lowered his power staff not far away, and asked in a deep voice, "Primarch, you really didn't come back at the right time. Right now, the entire fleet is accelerating its voyage in the real world to avoid the warp storm that is coming." Librarian Kahu Lanchi showed shark-like sharp teeth. He quickly reported to Rourke's direction. Warp storm. At this moment, Rourke, who subconsciously narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath. For a fleet or a ship, the warp storm can be said to be the most terrifying disaster in the cold universe, and there is no other. So, he turned his head and told Reditus, who was scanning around. Then Rourke immediately drove the power armor and ran with Librarian Kahu Lanchi towards the bridge of the flagship. Dong dong dong. Soon after, Rourke, who had just stepped into the interior of the bridge, saw countless solemn-looking mortal crew members and servitors being silently watched by Chapter Master Tyberos. Everything on the ship was being manipulated in an orderly manner amid the chaos. And on the virtual screens around that emitted a light green light. Only separated by the heavy metal hull, rows of terrifying scarlet tides, as if possessing life, were closely following the voyage trajectory of the entire Carcharodon's fleet, constantly spreading rapidly towards the depths of the cold void. "Tyberos, how far is our fleet from Triple Forge?" Rourke asked as he stepped forward. "Primarch, judging from the star map and the route, it is almost within reach, and Triple Forge can even be observed with the naked eye, but we can only rely on auxiliary engines to navigate at full power, and once the entire fleet is completely enveloped in the warp storm. When and where we can go, or whether we can return to the real world, I am afraid that only the Void Father knows." Tiberos, who was like a metal mountain, said in a deep voice without turning his head. Currently, the most important core ships in the entire man-eater shark's fleet. Besides the water monster battle barge, which serves as both the chapter monastery and the fleet flagship, and the daughter of the storm battle barge. There is also a White Maw Tyrant-class cruiser. 4 strike cruisers assigned to other man-eater sharks companies, and the strike cruiser in the hands of the Raven Guard, which has just been renamed Cold Raven. In addition, a total of 45 Sword-class frigates and Cobra-class destroyers form the main fighting force of the man-eater shark's fleet. The remaining ships are mostly ancient supply transports, human agricultural ships, slave ships, and the only large forged ship, Steel. These hundreds of ships, large and small, are not only the only assets that the man-eater sharks chapter has painstakingly accumulated over countless years. They are also a very important fighting force in the hands of Primarch Leas. Therefore, even the loss of any one of these ships, whether it was Chapter Master Tiberos or Leas, they were always unwilling to swallow this breath. However, at this moment, facing the warp's crimson tide, which was like the power of the universe, even the man-eater shark's fleet, which was enough to run rampant in most of the Imperial Star regions, had to desperately accelerate, trying to get away from the layers of raging warp storms behind them. In fact, besides the man-eater shark's fleet, which had accelerated all auxiliary engines to their limit, within millions of kilometers, in the cold void, there were also some large and small transport ships on the sector's shipping lanes, as well as mining fleets belonging to the Adeptus Mechanicus, frantically fleeing towards the Tria Pharos. Soon after, some civilian transport ships with auxiliary engine structures that were too old and whose sailing speed could not reach the limit were quickly and tightly wrapped in the rapidly sweeping warp storm. Subsequently, these swallowed ships disappeared silently into the depths of the warp storm, without leaving a trace. If the Emperor protects, and they are lucky enough, they may be able to return to real space after a period of time, either sooner or later. But it is also possible that they will never appear again, but will be completely lost in the warp. Buzzing. At this moment, even Leas, who was in the bridge of the flagship water monster, could clearly feel the low humming from the metal floor. This was the resonance phenomenon caused to the entire ship's metal hull after all the auxiliary engines reached their maximum operating state. And in the past, this kind of situation could only be encountered occasionally in those intense void naval battles. The shipboard servitors are to immediately notify the captains of all ships, telling them to activate their Geller fields in advance to prevent greater personnel losses after being caught in the warp storm. In addition, let the captains notify all the mortal crew members that, when necessary, supply transport ships or agricultural ships must buy space and time for the battle ships to accelerate and sail. That is to say, they must sacrifice themselves for the future of the entire Void fleet. At this moment, Chapter Master Tiberos, standing in front of Leas, quickly glanced at the virtual screens that were constantly refreshing data. As the master of the Void fleet, he issued a cold and ruthless order without any hesitation. It should be known that even on an ordinary supply transport ship, there are at least tens of thousands of mortal crew members maintaining engine navigation and material operation for a long time. And Tiberos's order undoubtedly deprived hundreds of thousands of mortal crew members and servants who were not on the core combat ships of their only hope of survival. Even if the ship is caught in a warp storm, it does not mean sacrifice. But if the Geller field unfortunately fails, then long-term exposure to the inside of the warp is tantamount to death for mortals. At this moment, Leas heard Chapter Master Tiberos's cruel order in his ears. He was just about to open his mouth to stop him. But Leas's gaze fell again on the virtual screen not far away. The terrifying scene of a mining ship belonging to the Adeptus Mechanicus being completely swallowed by the rolling crimson tide. Therefore, Leas, taking a deep breath, did not stop the rapid transmission of the order. Primarch, this is a necessary sacrifice, and it is the price that countless mortal crew members are willing to pay willingly for you and the Void Father. At this moment, Tiberos slowly turned his huge body. He looked down at the solemn Primarch with his emotionless black eyes, and said in a low voice, Tiberos, I know that the current situation is urgent, but it is precisely because I understand the principles and logic involved that I am even more unwilling. Leas, taking another deep breath, slowly squeezed out a sentence from between his closed teeth. Even when facing the tide-like orcs, the Tyranids, or the Chaos Demons, I will be fearless, but for this kind of warp storm that is raging wildly in real space, a mere Primarch is no different from any mortal. Wait. However, at this moment, just as Chapter Master Tyberos shook his head slightly, intending to continue to enlighten the Primarch, Liaz, whose thoughts suddenly flashed in his mind, seemed to have suddenly remembered something. Frowning slightly, he suddenly raised a huge palm wrapped in a vibro-steel shell, and the whole person was slightly dazed and stunned. Although I'm not sure if I can do it, but at this point, it doesn't hurt to try. Tyberos, you immediately notify all ships to form the most densely packed arrow formation possible, and maintain the ship's maximum acceleration state. In the next second, Liaz muttered to himself as he finished speaking. His entire tall body quickly activated the vibro-steel power armor. Turning around, he began a shockingly fast sprint towards the deserted passage outside the bridge. At the same time, the constantly wriggling and spreading skull helmet quickly covered Liaz's entire head. Dong dong dong. Repeatedly striding with heavy steps, Liaz quickly passed through the complex metal passages inside the upper deck of the ship. He successfully entered a maintenance airlock chamber that was only a door away from the cold void, and began to convert the pressure inside and outside, releasing a large amount of oxygen in the chamber. Chi. Soon after, Liaz actually put a magnetic boot, which was firmly attached to the metal deck, into the cold void. At this moment, Liaz could clearly see through the incomparably dark and cold void, the warp storm that was constantly raging behind the entire fleet. In the next second, one of his vibro-steel palms suddenly raised forward, and a low voice echoed back and forth inside the skull helmet. May the Emperor protect us. Come on, Qilin Divine Beast. Buzz buzz buzz. Accompanied by a series of buzzing sounds emanating from within Rorschach's vibranium-powered armor. Strands of multicolored T-Online divine power continuously flowed out from his body. In a short span of tens of seconds, a large amount of T-Online divine power eventually converged into 4 massive energy beams, each tens of kilometers long, almost covering the entire fleet formation. In the next second, a phantom dragon head, comparable in size to a planetary satellite, was successfully summoned by the constantly intertwined and fused T-Online divine power. However, at this moment, Rorschach, who was enduring immense mental strain, did not stop his intention to extract T-Online divine power. He gritted his teeth and completely poured all the power within his body into the interior of the T-Online divine beast. Rumble. At this moment, the phantom dragon head, which originally only had a huge head, gradually extended outward. And almost instantly, it completely revealed its massive body spanning the entire fleet, as well as its limbs comparable to battle barges, within the cold void. Immediately afterward, a strand of Rorschach's consciousness seemed to be projected onto this incomparably huge T-Online divine beast. It also allowed him to temporarily possess the terrifying power to resist the cosmic force of the warp storm. Chi. A terrifying torrent of energy, enough to easily destroy a space warship, erupted violently from the depths of the T-Online divine beast's phantom dragon head. And the only target of attack was the warp storm that was relentlessly chasing behind the fleet. Boom boom boom. In an instant, accompanied by the constant confrontation and collision of alien energy and chaotic energy. The Scarlet Tide, which seemed to have no end in sight up, down, left, and right, actually stagnated slightly, and then continued to spread rapidly towards the cold void in front. However, at this moment, Rorschach's strand of consciousness within the T-Online divine beast keenly captured this flaw. He began to desperately control the massive T-Online divine beast, launching a continuous stream of energy torrents towards the warp storm. In fact, even though Rorschach now temporarily possessed such powerful strength, he never thought of resisting the warp storm, which was like a cosmic force, with his own strength alone. What Rorschach wanted to do was to buy more time and space for the entire Void fleet. As long as the warp storm didn't engulf any ship before the fleet reached the starport orbit of Triple Forge, it would be a great achievement. Soon after, as time slowly passed, some Mechanicus mining ships and transport ships that were not far from the Void fleet also gathered around the fleet. The focused Rorschach did not care about this. He was always doing his best to maintain the massive T-Online divine beast's obstruction and delay of the warp storm. Even if he completely squeezed out the T-Online divine power in his body, he would not hesitate. Boom boom boom. Accompanied by a stream of energy torrents with increasingly long eruption intervals, the warp storm's constant spread was once again repelled. In a trance, Roche, who seemed to have lost the concept of time, was completely relying on his own tenacious will and mechanical thinking to maintain the basic operation of the T-Online Divine Beast. Primarch. We have arrived near the starport of Triple Forge. And when the vague shout of Chief Librarian Karcharos or Tiberius faintly reached the ears of the consciousness-blurred Roche, the string in his heart that had been tight suddenly relaxed. It also made Roche kneel on the ground like he had lost all his strength, slowly lowering his skull helmet, and falling into a state of unconsciousness. And within the cold void, the T-Online Divine Beast, whose energy was extremely dim, also quickly dissipated. When Roche woke up from his coma, it was already several hours later. And around him, the massive Tiberius and Chief Librarian Karcharos, as well as dozens of Terminator squads mixed from the Black Templars and the Lamenters, were silently enduring the loud scolding from the servo-skull Reditus. At this moment, Roche, whose eyes were not yet open, did not get up immediately. He listened for a while. Until the furious Reditus began to greet every Astartes intimately, the helpless Roche then drove his power armor to get up and stop him. Afterward, the gradually recovered Roche also spoke to appease all the kneeling Astartes. Only then did he carefully listen to the report from Chapter Master Tiberius. Currently, the entire Carcharodon's fleet has successfully arrived at the near-Earth orbit starport of Triple Forge. Moreover, under Roche's all-out effort, no ship has fallen behind or been swept into the depths of the warp. It even accidentally saved many civilian ships and the mining ships of Triple Forge. Of course, since the warp storm that is sweeping in has not completely dissipated on the Forge world and the surrounding star systems. Therefore, Tiberius and others have not established a truly meaningful connection with the Mechanicus of Triple Forge. However, judging from the situation of the temporary exchange of light flag signals between the two sides, there should not be any major problems. After all, not long ago, the oil-soaked old men who had almost completely watched the mysterious behemoth repeatedly wrestle with the warp storm through various large augury array detection equipment, can be said to be filled with an unspeakable respect and amazement for the current Carcharodon's fleet. Even according to Tiberius, on this Triple Forge forging world, which is the Far East Forge, from the top-level Forge generals to the bottom-level tech priests, everyone has more or less xenophobic ideas in their bones, and they have long disdained the delegation from Mars. But they have always maintained the highest level of respect and worship for the Emperor and the Gene Sire who can fully represent the Emperor himself. So, before the terrifying aura of the warp storm surrounding the entire Forge world had completely dissipated, a Magos of Triple Forge ventured to board a Thunderhawk transport to arrive at the flagship of the Carcharodon's fleet. Subsequently, when the cautious party learned from Reditus and Chief Librarian Karcharos, who were going to greet him, that there was also a Primarch in the fleet, this Magos's information processing system immediately entered a buzzing state of rapid operation. Although the Triple Forge forging world is not very fond of the Martian visitors who represent the Mechanicus itself, and has even made special behaviors similar to disobedience many times, but they are always loyal to the Imperium. Therefore, a Thunderhawk transport carrying a large number of Mechanicus adepts and Titan Legion, Vanquisher, commanders quickly launched a pilgrimage-like visit to the flagship, Megamouth, docked in near-Earth orbit. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.